Hey guys, tonight we slip into a narrow street where carts creak and geese complain, where the air tastes faintly of yeast, smoke, and wet wool. You're elbow deep in your trade kit, fingers stained the color of walnut husk, trying to claim a good spot near the stone cross before the market bell finishes its third slow clang. A porter yawns, a beadle pretends not to watch you, and a rival master, he always smells like lanolin and pride, measures the distance between your table and his with the kind of stare that counts as a weapon. This is the part where you probably won't survive, socially anyway, because one tiny misstep in a place this tightly woven can unravel your week like a badly warped loom. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You brace your shoulder against the table plank and slide it closer to the cross for shade, one boot heel skidding, the other finding good grip on the cobbles. The bell hasn't finished yet, but you're technically in position, and technically is the kind of word that turns neighbors into rule books. The guild charter says stalls open when the bell stops, not while it's singing. It also says your measuring stick, the town's fixed ell, must be on display, not tucked in your apron. You tell yourself you'll put it out in a second. Then a widow with quick eyes and a quicker purse strings angles toward you, and you make the sale before the last vibration dies. It's a neat piece of cloth, tight woven, decent selvage. You smooth it out like a magician and cut to length by sight, and there it is, your slip-up. Not using the public L wand mounted on the cross, not touching your own stamped yardstick to the cloth, trusting memory and mood in a town that trusts wood and iron. You trim true enough. Your hand is steady from long practice, but skill isn't the point. Visible obedience is. The beadle clears his throat like a church door shifting on its hinges. Your rival looks past you toward the cross, where the brass-tipped L hangs in official silence. You feel a small ripple pass through the crowd, the way wind crawls over barley. A mainstream truth floats here like the smell of bread. Medieval market life runs on rules. Most towns you could name anchor their mornings in a bell, and many fix an ell or yard at a public spot, so nobody cheats length. In some places, the weights are chained to the stall posts, fat iron pairs with honest heft. In others, inspectors roam with a box of counterweights like saints carrying relics. There's an assize of bread and ale out there, a whole legal tradition promising that loaves won't shrink and ale won't water itself into sadness. It comforts people, the promise that measures mean what they say. Your quirky tidbit arrives courtesy of the woman with the silk headscarf. Who buys next? She asks, quite sweetly. If you'll notch a tally stick for her husband's tab. Credit in wood. 2 slivers that match like twins. Each notch a debt that can't be rubbed away without the twin protesting. You smile, draw your knife, and make the neatest little V. The kind that says you were raised by someone who believed lines should be straight, even when the world isn't. The beadle watches this too. Credit is fine. Early cutting without the L, less fine. A few steps away, the alewife slaps foam off a pitcher with practiced grace. A child ties a string to a goose and loses the negotiation instantly. You hear the hard clack of pattens on stones and the soft skirl of a minstrel warming up near the church porch. The porch, you should know, is the unofficial newsstand. Baptisms, bans, bargains and talk, always talk. You can already imagine the phrasing, he cut cloth before the bell's last sigh and not an L in sight. It even rhymes a little. That's not good for you. Rhymes live longer than minutes. You try to do the right thing belatedly. Reach for your stamped L, lay it across the cloth with a flourish, nod to the beadle as if you have just discovered measurement, but the moment has been clocked, inked, and filed in the room of memory. everyone carries under their cap. Historians still argue whether guild rules mostly protected buyers from cheats or masters from competition, and to be fair, both hopes hide in the same bylaws. What matters to you, your heartbeat counting off the morning, is that you have demonstrated a preference for speed over ceremony, and ceremony is half the price tag here. The rival master takes a generous breath to say something clever, decides against it because cleverness can be quoted, and quotes become daggers. Instead, he raises his eyebrows at the beadle, as if asking the time. The beadle shifts his weight, touches the chain of his badge, and makes a short note on a wax tablet. A note is not a fine, but a fine begins as a note when the town wants to be polite. You keep selling. You smile more than you did 10 minutes ago. Your hands do a little theatre with the L, laying it down like an oath every time. It's possible to outpace a small mistake with flawless form. Possible, not guaranteed. Between customers, your mind runs like a squirrel. Will the guild clerk mention this at the next hall meeting? The handbook you skim at feasts, usually with gravy on the corner, says a first warning may be handled by good counsel, and a reminder to display your mark and tools. A second becomes a coin losing weight as it moves from your pouch to the chest under the guildhall's Christ icon. Thirds are where apprentices get pulled to reflect, and masters suddenly discover there are, sadly, no looms to rent this quarter, no die slots this week, no space on the tally for your charming debts. You catch the minstrel's melody now. It is, thankfully, about St. Crispin and shoes. Not you. He will sing anything for a penny, and pennies by memory. People swear they don't listen to minstrels, then hum their judgments to those tunes for months. You wonder how many pennies your rival would pay to have you immortalized as the early cutter of short cloth. You breathe out, slow, focus on the next cut, your elbow steady, the L laid bold as a banner. Another fact you can hold like a talisman. Towns often hung the standard L right on the market cross, sometimes branding the official measure onto the wood of the stalls. In some ports, customs men insisted bolts be measured by that bar before they left the quay, not simply at the stall. The idea was ritual transparency. Do it where eyes are. A second quirky whisper brushes your ear as a boy passes with a tray of hot wafers stamped with tiny crosses. He winks and says the wafer maker swears his iron shapes bless the dough enough to justify raising the price. You smile because you'd do the same if you owned a hot iron and a good story. Historians still argue whether bells truly governed hour by hour, or if people used them as rough poetry, like a weather report that also prays, you think, half to calm yourself. Either way, the bell matters today. You broke its spell a beat too soon. Not a crime, but a chord played wrong in a quiet room. By late morning, your waxed list of customers looks decent. The beadle has drifted away to scold a fishmonger, whose scales look self-interested. Your rival has found a better argument to occupy himself. A lady wants lapis-dyed bands, and his flattery could dye them twice. You straighten your back, count your coins, and accept a cup of watered ale. Yes, the assize would frown if it were too watery, but frowns do not cross a courtyard unless invited. Your joke for the hour, very gentle, very private, is that at least your measuring mistakes aren't measured in hangovers. You pack the offcuts with the care of a scribe, storing leftover vellum. When you finally hang your LA, where everyone can see, it feels like placing a shield where arrows expect it. The little ripple you sent through town will keep moving for a bit. Porch talk, alley chatter, maybe a note at the hall, but you've already begun to row against it, with clean cuts, visible measure, and an expression that says you are not here to steal an inch from anyone's trust. Behind you, the bell breathes again for midday prayers. You bow your head because bowing is a fine habit. When people are looking, tomorrow you'll arrive a heartbeat later. Lay the L first, and let the widow with the quick purse see you do it before she speaks. The town is clockwork and choir both. You just need to find your part in the song. You pack your cloth and coins and let your feet drift where everyone's feet drift after market, a lane that smells of malt and wet straw, toward an alehouse with a green-bushed pole jutting over the door like a brag. The brush is a promise. Ale is fresh today. It also doubles as the town's lighthouse for gossip. And you're already a small ship in need of steady waters. You push the oak door and ease inside. The light is low, the benches worn smooth by news, and the long table under the smoke hole remembers more secrets than the guild ledger ever will. You nod to the alewife, who wields her ladle like a bishop's crozier, and pours with judgment that could move mountains. You ask for small ale, the safer, lighter sort, and try to look like a person who always absolutely measures with the public ale. The first whisper brushes your shoulder like a moth. He cut before the bell finished. You pretend not to hear. Someone replies, a sliver soon enough, and soon enough a scandal. The room hums with that pleasant taffy-pulled murmur of people who have nothing to do, and the entire afternoon to do it. A mainstream truth takes a stool beside you. Alehouses are where towns keep their pulse, not just for drink, though the assize of Aleh's wants you to know it cares, but for hiring porters, trading rumours, striking tiny bargains that never meet parchment. Parish announcements may have a home on the church porch, but their interpretations grow legs here. The alewife leans in just enough that only you catch it. If you tapped the ale, love, they'd be humming about the weather. Her smile is kind. The words are a soft rap on the knuckles. She sprinkles a pinch of ground groot into your cup, bitter herbs in places where hops haven't won the war yet, and sets it down with a thud that says drink, then breathe. As you sip, the taster arrives, a town officer with a leather badge who dips a wooden cup, makes a thoughtful face, and announces that today's brew wouldn't drown a gnat. Good news, 2-week ale can earn a fine. You make a private joke, if only measuring ale were as dramatic as measuring cloth, and nearly smile into your foam. At the far bench, a carter retells your morning in broader strokes than the truth requires. By the time his story crosses the room, you have supposedly trimmed 2 fingers shorter than God intended and laughed like a pirate doing math. You let the lie pass, because correcting it would be like shouting into a river and expecting it to reverse. Quirky tidbit glints as the door opens. Above the lintel hangs a wreath of rosemary, tied with a red thread. The alewife says it keeps quarrels sweet and breath sweeter, though you suspect she likes the smell and the superstition suits her brand. Either way, the red thread quivers as more talk comes in. You leave coins, the kind that make a friendly clack, and step into the lane where the bell marks the hour like a low, patient animal. Your path slides toward the church, because everyone's path does, sooner or later. The porch is a gallery of ordinary theatre. Betrothals promised, work pledged, travel plans said out loud, so they feel real. You stand at the edge of it with your cap in your hands, listening to the soul of town life breathe in and out. A scribe nails a scrap, listing alms for a fire-struck widow. A reeve reads a notice about ditch repairs, and half the men pretend to study the sky. Then comes the side-eye, casual as dust. 2 matrons cross themselves in rhythm with their whispers. He seems a decent sort. Decent sorts follow the L. You amortize your guilt across your posture, spine straight, chin modest, hands visible, and volunteer to carry a bundle for an old man whose back resents ladders. Tiny courtesies are coin, and you spend what you have. A boy with ink on his fingers grins at you. Later he will copy a psalm, and in the margin draw a goose wearing a hat. Marginal drawings travel in ways, words do not. If you're lucky, you'll be a goose in that hat, and not the hat alone. A mainstream fact plants both feet on the porch stones. In many parishes, this is where business happens. Wills may be spoken here before they're written. Lawsuits may start as pointed sentences, muttered where everyone can hear. Preachers mount these steps to warn against watered ale and short measures, and sometimes they name names without naming them, the way a shepherd names a lost sheep, by describing the gap in the flock. You shuffle your weight and let the shadows from the porch moulding stripe your boots. Historians still argue whether the church porch functioned more like a town hall or a front-page column of hints and nudges, but either way, your name is sketched lightly in the air, not printed, not pinned, but present. Music coils down the lane like a ribbon. Hey, the minstrel you noticed earlier has chosen the sunlit patch near the buttercross, where coins shine brighter and verses pick up speed. You know this man, in the way one knows a seasonal illness. He visits, he lingers, he leaves people a little altered. He starts in on a new ditty about measures and men who love them less than haste. It's not about you, not explicitly. No one says your name, but the rhyme finds your outline and dresses it. He sings about the cloth that leapt the bell. It scans too well. People laugh the soft laugh of recognition. Songs are memory with a handle. Once a line fits the hand, it gets picked up often. You drift to the rim of his small crowd and drop a coin. Not hush money, he's not that kind of performer, but a request for tempo. He tilts his head at you, eyes merry, and slides a line into the verse about hands steady as an abbey beam. It helps. In a town this size, a flattering couplet can do as much as a clean ledger entry. Quirky side note, he wears a charm on a thong around his neck, a knuckle bone carved into a star. He swears it keeps fleas disinterested. You consider the power of belief. Even fleas might respect a good story. By late afternoon, your rumour has crossed lines. It didn't need to. A cloth buyer from the next parish quotes the song back to the ale stall like scripture. A carter adds hand gestures, transforming your 2-inch mistake that wasn't into something operatic. You do small triage. At the porch, you measure a scrap against the public L in an obvious pantomime and gift the scrap to a child making a rag doll. In the lane, you mention to the reeve, casually, pleasantly, that you'll bring your stamped stick to the guildhall for inspection any time they like. In the square, you publicly praise the beadle's vigilance to anyone who will listen. It's like turning your pockets inside out to prove your honesty, then sewing them back in plain view. Mainstream truth returns to pat your shoulder before paper notices and printed broadsheets muscle in music and mouth. Carry the town's data. Even later, when paper grows cheap and presses tire their arms, the habit of taking news with ale and rhyme never really leaves. Historians still argue whether minstrels mostly entertained or also functioned as semi-official messengers, but they agree that a clever chorus outlives minutes and sometimes outlives facts. Unfortunately for you, the chorus has good feet. Evening pushes its cool hand into the streets. The porch empties toward supper. The alehouse fills toward laughter. You choose a slower lane and the long way home. A cartwheel throws a spray of puddle across your ankle, and you take it as a blessing. Water cools heat, and rumour is mostly heat, looking for dry tinder. You pass the brush pole again, now shadowed, and hear the alewife's voice floating out. A story about a brewer who forgot to bless the tun and blamed the cat for a flat batch. She laughs at herself. Laughter is generous like that. You decide to borrow some. You arrive at your door with the lesson folded carefully. Tomorrow you will measure theatrically, until the town is bored of your precision. You will hum the minstrel's stupidly catchy line, while you lay your ale on cloth, so gently that even saints would nod. And when the porch eyes flicker your way, you will offer to hold someone's ladder again, because ladders make good metaphors for reputations. They look sturdy, but a single cracked rung teaches you to step with care. By the next market day you walk the long way to the guildhall, because the long way gives your face time to practice not looking worried. The hall sits with the self-confidence of old oak and rent money. its carved saints peering down as if they know everyone's ledgers by heart. You tuck your L in your belt where it shows. Inside, the air smells of beeswax and ink, hot iron from the brazier, and a hint of eel pie lingering from some dinner that happened before you were ready to be judged at 1. The warden's table is tidy in the way of people who prefer things that cannot talk back. You bow, not low enough to be a poem, but not so shallow that a clerk can make a note about your spine. You state your case gently. You have measured conspicuously all week. You will gladly have your stick compared to the public L. You will even pay to have your mark restruck, if it helps the town sleep. The senior warden listens with that generous stillness practiced by men who rarely change their mind in under a week. He nods toward your rival, already seated, already smelling like confidence and lanolin, and asks him whether the song has quieted. You feel yourself becoming a footnote to a chorus. It is not the position you wanted. The clerk flips open a leather folder and reads the bylaw you didn't memorize because it felt like furniture. No master shall sell before the ringing be finished, nor measure cloth unless the standard be present and seen, to present and seen. You love the poetry of it a little less today. Today, a mainstream historical truth pulls up a bench beside you. Across much of late medieval Europe, crafts policed themselves through guilds, companies with oaths, dues, quality checks and public searches. Masters kept touch marks, shop signs and yes, official measures. Wardens and searchers made rounds to test weights, inspect seams and seize shoddy work. See. In London, a searcher could break open a suspect barrel. In many cloth towns, he could snip a sample right off a bolt. Everyone prefers when the snipping happens to someone else. You open your palms. Let the searchers come, you say, and you mean it. That earns you a small nod, which is what passes for mercy in a room built to keep the town from exploding over things like short cloth and long tempers. The nod is followed by something colder. Until then, the warden adds, no master will vouch for your apprentice's outside work, and no yardage will be stamped with the company mark from your bench. There it is, the quiet closing of a dozen doors. Vouching is how apprentices keep eating when the week is thin. Stamps are how cloth moves past suspicion to coin. You feel the floor tilt under your boots just slightly, as if your future slid toward a crack between boards. You step outside into the hall's narrow side yard, where the light lands like a reasonable argument. Two lads who usually help you haul the table away from the rain, apprentices from allied benches, stand with caps in their hands. Their masters have sent them to rest their backs this fortnight. It means you'll be lifting alone. It also means their masters won't be seen near your stall until the song forgets its words. Apprentices are promises written on other people's paper, tender, provisional, and masters protect their paper. You can't even be angry. You just rearrange your day around the missing hands and feel how much heavier wood gets when it senses you're unwelcome. Back inside, the searchers unwrap the standard L like a relic, brass shod, burnished by 100 obedient years. It looks longer than yours because the room wants it that way. They lay your stick next to it. The lengths match within a breath. No thrill, no drama, good wood agreeing with good wood. Your heart remembers how to beat like a person's heart and not like a rabbit's. Still, the clerk scratches a note into wax. Fault not of measure, but of order. You almost admire the phrasing. It's like being told your ship is sound. But the lighthouse dislikes your manners. Quirky tidbit to keep your courage company. The guild's strongbox sits at the end of the table, a great oaken chest with 3 separate locks. One key lives with the warden, one with the clerk, one with the elder who never learns names, because memory would soften him at the wrong moments. It takes all 3 to open the chest. Dues, fines, alms, and pageant money sleeping inside. When they haul it forward to fetch the book of penalties, all 3 lean in like a chorus of saints deciding the weather. The book lands open to a tidy column. First offence, admonition. Second, small fine. Third, suspension from common buying and the withdrawal of common charity. You imagine your name in neat ink, then imagine it gone from the alms list at the same stroke. The song suddenly sounds less catchy. The warden speaks with the weight of baked bread on a winter morning. We'll have your shop viewed this week. Until then, hold to plain sales and show your ale before your hand. You nod. You will hold to plain sales. You will measure theatrically enough to bore saints. You ask, carefully, whether your apprentice may still present his weekly piece to the bench for comment, the small right that keeps his path toward journeyman from drifting. The answer arrives with the softness of wool and the sharpness of a new shears. He may present at another bench. The rule is fairness pretending to be neutral. Your apprentice will be judged, but far from your shadow, as if craft skill migrates away from rumour by walking. A mainstream fact places a steadying hand between your shoulders. Many apprenticeships ran 6 to 8 years in towns like London or York. A journeyman then chased wages, saved coin, and eventually submitted a masterpiece to qualify for the company. Not every craft demanded a single grand object. Sometimes it was a suite of tasks performed under watching eyes. But the idea of approving work, stamped and sworn, travelled well. Historians still argue whether guilds were warm-blooded welfare networks or chilly little cartels, proto-unions or micro-monopolies, but everyone agrees they could choke a livelihood by tightening 3 or 4 quiet chords: credit, stamp, help, and rumour. You feel each chord slide a notch. You step out into the narrow lane behind the hall and nearly collide with a boy balancing a tray of almond tarts. He grins and tells you the company dinner features lamprey pie when accounts are good and peas pottage when the saints are testing us. You thank him, buy a tart you can't afford, and think about how institutions calm themselves with pastry. It works on you a little. Sugar talks softly to fear. When the searchers finally come to your shop, they don't knock like friends. They knock like the door owes them something. You let them in with your best steady face. They test your weights. They examine your L again. They hold a piece to the light to watch how the weave settles into honesty. One of them taps his knuckle along your warp-weighted frame and listens as if wood can confess. Sound, he says, and it's the kindest word you've heard this week. They do, however, take one small bolt that looks a touch slack at the selvage to show at hall, they say, the way surgeons say to study. You agree, you would agree, if they asked for your shadow. When they leave, your apprentice stares at the empty space where the bolt was and asks if that means no wages. You tell him the truth, dressed in soft cloth. It means the week will ask both of you for patience. He nods, a good lad pretending the ground doesn't list under his feet. You give him the task of oiling the shears and balancing the thread weights, jobs that smell like competence and sound like ticking clocks. Skill still matters. Your hands still know the work, but the bylaws you skimmed between mouthfuls of gravy step forward now and ask to be read like scripture. Evening gathers like a comfortable shawl rather than a sentence. You walk past the alehouse, and the brag bush nods in the breeze. The alewife catches your eye and points 2 fingers at her own heart, a small pledge that she at least will tell the story straight, if asked. Bless her rosemary wreath and her red thread. You pass the church porch. The minstrel is working a new stanza about a brewer who watered ale with tears and ended up rich because sadness sold. You laugh, quiet but real. 1 joke per day is medicine, this one counts. At home by the low fire's orange, you lay out your tools the way soldiers lay out kit before a march. L, weights, stamp, awl, scissors, thread, chalk. You rub a drop of oil into the L's end until brass shines like an argument you can win. Tomorrow you will cut slowly enough that even the beadle will blink from boredom. You will ask the clerk to witness 3 clean sales and make a note. You will send your apprentice to present his piece at another bench with a blessing heavy enough to keep his shoulders from curling. And you will wait, because in towns like this, waiting is a craft too, learned in the same way as weaving, by counting, by keeping tension even, by trusting that good structure holds when you can't see all the threads at once. By midweek you find yourself drifting toward the church steps, as if the stones have decided for you. The porch columns hold their cool like a promise, or waxy drips along the baseboards. Remember every candle that begged heaven for better weather or better neighbours. Father Martin waits there in a cloak that has seen more rain than the reef behind the dye vats. He's the sort of priest who smells faintly of ink and beeswax, with eyes that measure you the way a carpenter measures a board, checking grain as much as length. He gestures to a bench. You sit. Your L sits too, conspicuously, like a very obedient dog. He doesn't open with thunder, he opens with housekeeping. There's a visitation coming from the Archdeacon next month, he says, and he'd prefer not to spend it explaining why a harmless measuring song is pecking at the parish like a woodlark. Then comes the offer dressed as advice, a brief public penance, bare feet on the nave stones at Sunday Mass, a taper in your hands, a short prayer for the comfort of consciences offended by appearance, and the talk will fold itself up like winter linens. Refuse, and the apparitor you picture, a man whose hat contains more law than his skull, may deliver you a summons to the church court. Not a mortal peril, but no one sleeps better after being named in Latin. A mainstream truth unspools between you. Medieval church courts didn't just weigh souls. They handled everyday frictions, oaths, slander, marital spats, tithe tangles, breach of faith, even quarrels that began as jokes and fermented. Plenty of petty defamation wandered through those doors, because reputation was as tradable as grain. If you want a business to breathe steadily again, you sometimes let the church count your breaths in public. You look down at your boots and imagine them off, your toes negotiating the chill of stone. Father Martin doesn't say hair shirt, but you can see the linen bundle tucked near the door, the kind that scratched charity into a person's posture. He explains the simple route. You stand near the chancel step, while the congregation hums their way through the credo. You hold a wax taper, paid for by you, of course by you, and say a few words about wanting your dealings to be straight as a ship's mast. There may be a small barefoot circuit around the nave afterward, one quiet turn while the last hymn dies. Then silence, blessed silence. Quirky tidbit arrives courtesy of the sacristan shuffling past with a ledger under his arm. The parish sells holy loaf on feast days, a blessed bread torn and shared after Mass. In some towns, missing out on that loaf marks you as out of favour, as surely as a bell refusing to ring your hour. The sacristan grins and says last year the baker put anise in it, and half the church decided anise tasted like a dare. You file that away with the rosemary above the alehouse door, and the minstrel's flea charm, tiny domestic magic that keeps hearts aimed in one direction rather than another. You ask the priest, gently, whether this penance smells of guilt to those who sniff for it. He admits it smells of reconciliation, which is close enough for people who prefer peace to perfect accounting. He drops 2 words shaped like a spade: minor excommunication, not a curse, not fireworks, just the possibility of being formally barred from the sacraments if you defy a lawful order to make amends. Historians still argue whether parish clergy used such censors often, or merely threatened them like a rain cloud that convinces farmers to hurry harvest. Either way, no one wants to test where mercy ends and paperwork begins. Your mind runs its fingers along the consequences. To be shut out, even briefly, no communion, no confession heard, would hang around you like a bad dye job, or a credit would cool. Guild charity would fidget. The alewife would still serve, because rosemary is powerful and she has a heart, but even her ladle might hesitate. Father Martin sees the math behind your eyes. and adds a sweetener. He suggests you couple the penance with a small alms, a pound of wax to the parish lights, or a pot of oil for the sanctuary lamp. Light chases shadows. People enjoy the symbolism of mischief turned into brightness. Also, wax bills get paid. A mainstream fact drops its anchor with a satisfying thud. After the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, parishes across Latin Christendom leaned harder into regular confession and penance, expecting people to present their messes at least yearly, and to perform satisfactions, alms, fasts, pilgrimages suited to the harm done. Bedtime, public ritual wasn't just punishment, it stitched torn fabric back together where everyone could see the mending. Historians still argue whether such theatre actually deterred misdeeds, or mostly reassured onlookers that society had agreed on its lines. To these ting, you suspect both are true, in the way bread is both food and smell. A swallow loops under the porch rafters, indifferent to law. Father Martin lowers his voice to the tone people use when passing sharp tools. There's gossip that a city officer in the next ward wants to make example cases this season. Tidy little sermons with human props. So it would be prudent, he says, to deny him a prop. Better your toes meet cool stone on Sunday than your name meet a clerk's tidy hand on Monday. You nod. Your pride protests, as pride does, but pride didn't help carry the table without those apprentices. Pride did not sing your rival silent. He shows you the taper, stout, pale, an honest hand's length, and asks whether Sunday high mass suits. You ask for early mass instead, hoping fewer eyes make quicker mercy. He agrees, smiling the way a man smiles who prefers reconciliation to paperwork. You agrees, smiling the way a man smiles who prefers reconciliation to paperwork. He even offers a phrase for your little speech. I meant no haste beyond the bell. I seek to be measured by the town's measure and God's. It's a good sentence, plain, with a hinge in the middle that opens toward everyone at once. Another quirky side glint. The church warden's account book lists ale for the watch on midsummer and mending of the bell rope, mouse-gnawn. Church ales, fundraisers, in the very place that frowns at drunkenness, keep the roof watertight and the poor box interested. The town loves its tidy hypocrisies. You can love them too, in small serviceable amounts. You step into the nave with your boots still on to gauge the space. The flagstones hold a mild chill even at midday, the kind of cool that makes a person aware of their bones. You picture yourself barefoot, taper bright, voice steady. You picture the minstrel raising an eyebrow and deciding a repentant verse scans better than a defiant one. You allow yourself one joke, the very quiet kind, that at least your feet will finally meet the floor. Your coins have been helping to keep swept. As you leave, the priest touches the iron ring bolted to the north door, a remnant of sanctuary custom, and says softly, "People come here to buy time and to buy back names." You nod. Though sanctuary is a different road, you hope not to walk. You tuck the word away. Its day will likely come when tempers elsewhere do not cool. For now you choose the gentler purchase, a taper, a few steps without leather, some words that straighten a crooked song. On the steps you meet the beadle. He looks at your hands and sees no fight there. He grunts something like approval and mentions he'll be at early mass to keep peace with the boys who prefer bells to silence. You thank him and mean it. The town works best when its minor officials think in verbs. Evening sidles down the lane. The rosemary above the alehouse door nods like an old aunt who always wins arguments by tiring them out. You buy a small jug for the priesthood's table. Good ale, tasting faintly of Groot and Luck, and leave it with the sacristan, who records such niceties in tidy lines. Back home you find clean wool for Sunday, set aside coin for wax, and teach your toes the idea of patience by setting them on the cool hearthstone. When sleep arrives, you dream not of courts but of quiet feet crossing a floor that forgives weight. Sunday will ask for a little humility, a little chill, a little flame held steady against a draught. You can do all three. If the town sees a candle and hears a sentence and exhales, you may find your apprentices back at your side, your rival reduced to perfect pleasantries, and the minstrel humming your name in a key that suits you. Monday limps in with a face like wet linen, and you find yourself counting the costs of being a proverb. The candle on Sunday helped. People nodded, the beadle stood easy, and even the minstrel folded a respectful couplet into his tune. Still, the phrase "the cloth that leapt the bell keeps hopping," and one neighbour, our operatic carter, has begun to tell it, as if he personally wrestled you away from the public hell. You could let time knead the rumour flat, or you could step into the small theatre where words are weighed, the borough court. You rehearse in your head what a complaint might sound like without sounding like a complaint, because in towns like this, law is a ladder you climb while pretending you're only looking at the view. The court meets in the hall you already know too well, benches pushed back, a trestle set for the clerk, a brazier throwing up brave heat, and the same saints on the wall checking everyone's arithmetic. The sergeant shouts names. The clerk scratches with a quill that could conduct an orchestra of sighs, and jurors, your neighbours, shuffle onto a long bench that looks incapable of mercy or malice, and therefore may be capable of both. A mainstream truth takes its seat beside you. Borough courts across late medieval England and cousins on the continent heard a weekly or fortnightly tangle of debt, trespass, broken contracts, nuisances, and defamation, small wrongs with large echoes, recorded on plea rolls that swallowed more ink than sermons did. Juries were not strangers. They were the people who knew your dog's bark and your stool's squeak. You speak softly with the clerk before the shouting begins in earnest. He explains your options as if sorting buttons. You can bring an action on the case for slander, showing loss from false words, or ask for amends by arbitration at a love day under the alder tree, out back. He raises a quizzing eyebrow at damages, and you catch the hint. Coin awards tend to be modest. Amercements fines for the wrongdoer are at the court's pleasure. Satisfaction often looks like a public apology tied to a small feast that feeds the juror's patience. He adds, almost kindly, that accusing a man of short measure touches the town's nerves. A verdict either way will ring like a bell. You picture your rival master, smiling with his eyes while his mouth stays pious. Quirky tidbit wonders in wearing last year's hat on love days. It's not unheard of for the parties to serve warm ale and a pie. The pastry literally called Love Day bread in some places to sweeten the oath-taking. People swear peace on crust more convincingly than on parchment. The grease persuades. The clerk points with his quill to a corner where a bundle of hazel rods leans. He says the steward sometimes breaks a twig at the settlement to mark the end of bad talk, the way a buyer used to hand a straw for stucca to seal land deals. Small props keep big feelings in order. You think about the carter, the rhyme, the apprenticeship, already fraying at the edges. If you sue and lose, you pay amercement and wear a new verse like a hat, the fool who cried court when a song could fade. If you sue and win, the carter pays and apologizes, and you become the man who took a neighbor to law, accurate, unhelpful. Historians still argue whether these borough juries protected working folk from spite or mainly enforced elite comfort while letting everyone feel heard. You decide to walk the middle path, file the complaint, then be very available for a love day the minute anyone suggests it. The sergeant calls, voice round as a drum. You step forward. The clerk recites your words in a Latin that makes them seem older and calmer than when you rehearsed them at the hearth. You do not name the minstrel. You name the carter, who put inches on the tail until it scraped your shop sign. He answers as carters answer, loudly, with jokes meant for the jury's bellies. The steward's face develops a patient glaze. the look of a man who has seen all jokes and weighed them, like coins that jingle but do not pay rent. The jury listens in that paradoxical way neighbours have. They know too much and so try to know nothing. One coughs into his sleeve and glances at your L, which you have, of course, carried like a small banner. Another studies the carter's boots and finds in them a testimony to mud. A mainstream fact steadies your breath. Jurors here are not detectives. They are weather vanes that turn toward the town's idea of fairness. If your Sunday candle blessed anything, it blessed the angle of these vanes. The steward suggests firmly, because firmness is faster, that the parties repair for a love day before noon prayers and return with an agreement. Apology, small amends, no more public embroidery on the morning in question. You nod before the carter does, because speed writes the tone. Out under the alder tree you stand with 2 oath helpers. Your beadle offers himself, which is a quiet gift, and 2 of the carter's mates. An old woman from the lane produces what she calls peacemaking biscuits, which taste like charcoal and optimism. The clerk, who has seen 1,000 settlements, keeps his quill poised but ungenerous. No one gets poetry today. You lay out what you want in sentences that don't show their teeth. A recanting at the next market, or copper to the poor box, and the promise that his hands will carry loads, not verse. The carter blusters, then looks at the beadle, then looks at the biscuits, as if wisdom might be baked into them, and agrees to words that amount to "I overstated for the joy of my tongue." His mates snort, the friendly kind, and one offers to deliver 3 bundles for you this week on the cheap. You blink at that. Charity crawls into the strangest sacks. Back inside, the steward hears the terms, nods, and breaks a hazel twig. The clerk enters it, on the roll in a line that looks like a comb run through wet hair. A fine at the mercy, lands on the carter, not ruinous, not forgettable. You catch the jurors' faces, soften the way bread does when you put it near steam. The sergeant calls the next case, some poor soul whose boundary hedge walked overnight, and your part is suddenly done, like a tune cut short by a new dance. You step into the lane with a curious lightness, the kind that follows after you have breathed on a window and wiped it clean. A mainstream truth strolls with you to the square. Manor courts and borough courts ran on rhythm, view of frank pledge in spring and fall, to check tithings, weekly pleas to keep commerce from chewing its own tail, small fines to season the stew of order. Not everything needed the king's bench when a group of neighbours and a clerk with a quill could turn quarrel into custom. Historians still argue whether the petty courts kept the peace by soothing or by scaring, whether the fines funded fairness or just festive dinners. You find yourself less interested in the large question and more in the agreeable fact that your bench will be lifted by friendly arms again. Quirky drift at the door. The usher pockets a walnut and hands you the shell half, muttering that some men keep them full of lavender and pin them inside tunics against moths and nerves. You have rosemary, lavender now, and the memory of holy loaf with anise. If reputation has a scent, you decide it is halfway between a herb garden and warm pastry. At market you measure so conspicuously you could sell tickets. When the carter passes, he stops, clears his throat, and in a voice trained to move barrels admits he made the story bigger than the day, that the L did its duty, and so did the hand. The minstrel, never one to miss a melodic opportunity, slides a new refrain over the old. The cloth kept time with the bell at last. The rhyme isn't as catchy as the insult, but it will do. People prefer a chorus they can hum without feeling mean. You sell 3 bolts before noon, all by the book, with the public L kissed like a relic. The beadle writes nothing. Your apprentice returns with ink on his thumb and relief in his eyes. Another bench praised his selvage, and praise travels fast when 2 masters owe you small favours for not making their court day longer than it had to be. You hand him the lavender half shell, like it's a talisman, and he nods with priestly seriousness. One gentle joke for the hour. You whisper that if business stays this calm, you may potentially petition the guild to rename you Master of Public Measuring, terribly slow. He laughs, which is a good measure of health. Evening slides in, and the brush over the alehouse door looks smug in the best possible way. The alewife toasts your settlement with a cup that tastes like compromise and cinnamon. You lift it and think about how quickly a town can turn from a jury to a love day, from a rhyme to a biscuit, from a twig snap to a handshake. Tomorrow there will be new frictions. Someone's pig, someone's ditch, someone's borrowed ladder. But tonight your name has fewer splinters. You walk home with the ale warm under your palm, and the sense that this little court, with its hazel twigs and hungry quills, has chalked a line you can live between. 2 mornings after the alder tree piece, the square wakes early, and the air has that taut, expectant feel of bread right before the crust takes. The beadle's pole leans against the buttercross. Beside it waits the town's pillory, oak darkened by weather and 1,000 hands that pretended not to touch it. You keep walking because you would rather count peas than count the holes in that wood. But the square draws you anyway. A fishmonger has been presented for false weight, and market justice likes a stage. You stand at the edge, L visible, heart steady, and try not to imagine your own jaw where another man's will rest. The bailiff speaks with the gravity of a man who has learned to stretch a sentence long enough for a crowd to nod on time. He rattles off the charge. Scales doctored with a pebble tucked under the pan. Old trick, older disgust. A mainstream fact stands right there in the open. Across much of medieval Europe, the pillory and stocks policed market trust. Short measure, forestalling, bad wares, dishonest weights. Offences that didn't simply offend God, they offended lunch. To immobilize a head and hands where everyone buys bread is a sermon with very short words. Do not cheat where we eat. The fishmonger's neck goes into the semicircle. The upper plank comes down. No gore, no ropes bitten through, just a hinge and a click that compresses a man's options to the size of his face. The town long ago banned stones for pelting, but no one banned smells. Rotten apples thud harmlessly enough. Sour whey finds a home beneath a collar. An egg kisses his temple and slides toward indecision. You make yourself watch, because looking away doesn't make a custom less real. You imagine, unhelpfully, your own face there, your own neck learning the lesson of oak, and your stomach does a small, quiet flip. The only good news you think is that if the eggs are fresh, someone will be mad at the waste. If they're old, at least you didn't buy them yesterday. Tiny joke, small mercy. The beadle keeps a line between jeer and injury, with the same firm hand he uses on feasts to keep boys out of the custards. He will allow 1 hour, 2 at most, because order must shake its tail and then go back to sleep. Historians still argue whether public shame in cases like this deterred future cheating or mostly fed a town's appetite for theatre, but everyone agrees the theatre had rules. The alewife's rosemary bunch sniffs at the breeze from her doorway, and you swear it approves when she brings out a bucket and a cloth for the clean-up later, because after rage comes sweeping. Across the square, a carpenter's boy fiddles with the handholds of the stocks, sliding the bolt back and forth as if it were a song. You've sat on those stocks once yourself, years ago, for a dusk brawl that was mostly elbows and pride. Your memory of them is splinters and the smell of dirt. Stocks take feet, sometimes hands too. Pillory takes pride, both take time. You could have sold for bread. A mainstream fact taps your shoulder again. Some towns paired punishment with display of the very tools that lied. False weights hung around a neck, a broken measure tied to the wrist, so passers-by could see the mismatch between trade and truth. That oak and iron did as much accounting as any ledger. Quirky tidbit drifts out of the crowd on a boy's laugher. He's waving an inflated pig bladder tied to a stick, bopping his mates with a sound like a drum, trying not to be one. Someone's uncle swears that in last year's charivari, he saw a drummer use 2 such bladders to mark time, while pans and kettles did the melody. Rough music, call it charivari. Skinnington, riding the stang, is the town's unofficial orchestra of disapproval. When the law keeps reasons and the parish keeps records, the neighborhood keeps noise. Usually it plays for marital scandals, bullies, or men who forget that wives are human. Sometimes it plays for officers who collect fines with more zeal than sense. You feel the square gather that other sort of energy now, the thin, tinny, toothy excitement that comes when people decide to be a single, very loud thing. Word skitters that a teamster beat a widow's boy for dropping a sack, and suddenly a dozen pans appear from nowhere, a few horns, the pig bladder again, and a line of faces set in the grim humor of people who plan to go to sleep satisfied. The beadle has his hands full with the pillory. The rough music crowd chooses a lane where officials thin out. You move with the stream, not leading but near enough to count breaths. They find the teamster in his yard, the poor man halfway between dinner and denial. A crossbar, someone's door taken off its hinges, appears like a stage prop. Two lads lift it. The crowd roars a rhythm, and you cheeks heat for the widow, and for the town, and for the fact that your own name was once a stick they almost carved into. Historians still argue whether rough music mainly reinforced power from the top down, or could punch up against petty tyrants with surprising effectiveness. The evidence sings in two voices, cheerful and cruel. You watch the balance in your lane tilt from justice toward relish and feel your stomach flip again. You step forward, softly, absolutely not like a hero. And you do the one thing that sometimes deflates a crowd without insulting it. You offer a better prop, pring the public L. You say to a boy with legs like rope and the balance from the butter cross, people love a test. Tests are drama with math. A dozen voices repeat the balance, as if it were a chorus, and the heat in the lane cools a half degree. The widow, God grant her patience, nods through tears. The teamster, face white as chalk on slate, agrees to weigh out a rebate of grain to the boy's mother, under eyes, under measure, under that great brass-shod arm. Everybody trusts on market days. Back in the square you lay the balance on its stand like a sacrament. The beadle, seeing what the lane has become, drifts over with an importance that invites obedience. The teamster makes it right by measure, not by bruises, with every grain counted as if God keeps ledgers in kernels. Hear that? The pans cling and kiss at equilibrium. The crowd's shoulders drop by inches. A drummer gives the pig bladder a final comic boop, the sort of sound that lets people laugh without dishonoring the seriousness of 5 minutes ago. The charivari mood collapses into a mutter. It is not that rough music won't return. It always does. But today it has been tuned down to something like a rehearsal. A mainstream truth puts a hand on your elbow, towns calibrated. Shame, pillory for market cheats. The cucking stool, you wince at the thought of cold water for licensed alewives who watered more than piety allowed. Fines and amends and apologies for tongues that ran ahead of brains. Exile for those whose presence spoiled the pot and could not be seasoned back in sanctions scaled with custom. Custom scaled with neighbours' tolerance. Neighbours' tolerance scaled with how loudly children were crying. None of this is tidy. All of it is specific. The fishmonger is released from the pillory, with a face that will smell like breakfast for a week. He scrubs with water the alewife set out, and she, a practical saint if there ever was, hands him a scrap of rough cloth and the advice to mend his scales before the feast of Saint What's-his-name. You catch his eye, and against your better instincts, manage a nod that is not forgiveness, but a map in that direction. He nods back, which is the first step in everyone's favourite pilgrimage. Quirky detail sneaks in as the beadle hoists his pole again. The pillory here bears a small iron hook on its side, where once a year the midsummer garlands hang before the pageant begins. Even the tools of scolding get decorated when the town feels festive, as if to remind everyone that the same square holds saints and sinners, flowers and filth, depending on the hour. You picture rosemary woven through that hook and can't help smiling. Perhaps the alewife is moonlighting as an urban designer. You walk home by the lane where the charivari nearly happened and notice a single wooden spoon on the ground, its bowl dented from enthusiastic ethics. You pick it up, turn it over, and imagine its owner explaining to a wife why the kitchen now has one less spoon, but the street has one less shout. Historians still argue whether these communal rituals left people safer or just quieter. You know only that your town sleeps better when its anger finds a way to spend itself without breaking bones. At your door you hang your L where it catches the evening light. Visible, boring, faithful, and set the rescued spoon by the hearth to dry. You tell your apprentice, with what you hope is an instructive shrug, that you've seen two schools of discipline today, oak and noise. Oak works fast. Noise works wide. You prefer the third thing when you can manage it. Measure in public, apology with biscuits, a beadle who likes verbs, and a rosemary wreath keeping the air honest. He nods like a boy who wants to live in a town where people choose those combinations on purpose. You fall asleep thinking about the pig bladder's ridiculous pop, and how sometimes silliness is the rope that pulls a crowd back from the cliff. Tomorrow there will be more weighing, more watching, more very public patience. That's fine. After all this, you've grown fond of boredom. It suits a reputation the way oil suits a hinge. You dress more carefully now, as if cloth were a language, and you're finally learning verbs. After the alder tree piece and the pillory morning, you decide your tunic should speak reliable, in a dialect everybody understands. Decent wool, no showy slashes, sleeves that don't audition for a parade. The rosemary over the alehouse door taught you something. Signals set the air before words do. So you trade the jaunty red cap, the one the minstrel once said could hail ships, for a sober hood that covers your ears and your mouth when you need to keep both from making weather. The town reads clothes like ledgers, best to balance your outfit. On the way to market, you pass a pair of young bucks testing the length of their shoe points against a curbstone, grinning like cats. The pole lanes could harpoon a small fish, a beadle clears his throat, and a cord appears to measure tips, not beyond good sense. A mainstream truth taps your sleeve. Late medieval towns loved sumptuary rules, little civic sermons in law form, no fur beyond your rank, no excessive silk, sleeve lengths that won't sweep orphanages clean by accident, shoe points that stop short of tripwire. In some places the rules favoured feast days with extra fuss. In others, widows got exceptions for black velvets that spoke grief with good grammar. Your own guild rolls mention who may wear vair and who must content themselves with lamb, as if fashion were a staircase patrolled by polite guards. You tie your belt 2 loops simpler than usual and leave the bright knife handle at home. Knives say more than they cut. The guildhouse door posts a reminder: no gold on apprentices, no miniver for anyone who can't spell it. And you smile because someone in the clerk's office has a sense of theatre. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws actually trimmed anyone's sleeves, or just let aldermen feel like tailors of souls. The court rolls show bursts of enforcement, then long naps like a watchdog who wakes to bark at festivals and snores through wet Tuesdays. What matters for you? People are watching, and your shoes do not need sermons. At the church porch, a penitent shuffles by in a rough linen shift, hair cut close, carrying a candle like a small apologetic son. The sight sends a cool draft down your back. You remember your own taper and the way stone politely refuses to warm to any foot. Father Martin nods to the penitent and murmurs a prayer that sounds like a seam pulled straight. A quirky tidbit lands with the sacristan's wink. For some public satisfactions, the parish keeps a closet of conspicuous garments, penitents' tunics, patched on purpose, with a rope belt for humility, as if wardrobe could knit reputation back together under everyone's eyes. Some towns shaved crowns or clipped beards to mark the season of mending. Others required a veil or a badge, a visible comma in a person's sentence. Speaking of badges, the square glints with little pewter miracles today. Pilgrims back from Canterbury or Compostela wear their souvenirs like punctuation, the scallop shell, the Canterbury ampulla, tiny saint, whoever in lead tin alloy, proof that feet went somewhere holy and returned with a certificate you can sew. You've worn a badge or two yourself after local shrines, not for bragging rights, but because it keeps conversation gentle. Mainstream fact, steady as the butter cross. Pilgrim badges were mass-made by mould, sold by the handful, and pinned to hats and hoods, so your piety could travel in the same weather as your head. They also work, incidentally, as small shields against gossip. No one heckles a man whose hat is telling a saintly story. Your apprentice arrives in a livery hood, borrowed for the day from a confraternity that sponsors lamps for the nave. The blue cloth with its white tassel reads, "Someone vouches for me." You squeeze his shoulder. Livery can pull you back into a circle faster than a lawsuit can. Historians still argue whether confraternities were mainly pious safety nets or quiet power clubs with candles. You're content to let the lamp burn and take the warmth without auditing the intent. The market churns. You measure conspicuously. The public L practically purrs under your hand now, and you mind your hem. Across the aisle a merchant's wife swans by in sleeves like banners, each trailing ribbon a proclamation. Two matrons exchange glances that could embroider. A beadle coughs helpfully. The wife's husband tugs a ribbon loose with the look of a man rescuing a cat from a spinning wheel. You keep your face bland enough to store milk. You have your own small theatre to manage. A neighbour, one of the choirmen with a taste for vermilion hose, asks whether you're well mended now. You nod, tilt your hood so the pilgrim badge catches light, and offer him a careful strip of cloth for his wife's new kirtle. "Jesunio the Kurspriesters, you wido wellster," plain and strong you say. He smiles, that particular relenting smile people reserve for bargains and soap, and flips you a penny. Signals do half the haggling, the other half is patience. The guild warden passes, fur collar, modest as a vow, chain of office, peeking out like a secret. He pauses, eyes your belt, your sleeves, your apprentice's borrowed blue, and says, "Good order." 2 words, expensive as silk. You answer with the smallest bow, and mentally refund the cost of not wearing the jaunty cap. Quirky colour note from the dyer's stall behind you. He is hawking a green that he swears is the famous goose turd shade, prized by students who wish to be fashionable and invisible at once. You do not need that colour today, though it pleases you that something so rude can be so chic in the right company. You cross the square to the cloth inspector's bench for the weekly stamp. A heavy mallet and a lead seal turn bolts into certified promises. The inspector's boy wipes the matrix on his jerkin and says his master can always tell a bastard scarlet. The poor man's red Kermes dreams died with madder by the way it blushes in rain. Mainstream truth, scarlet, once bucked and shorn and dyed and re-dyed, could command sums that made men comb hillsides for insects. You wonder, idly, whether there's a sumptuary rule for insects. If there were, the clerk would find a way to phrase it charmingly. You arrange your next week around appearances. Feast day, you'll add 1 ribbon, not 2. Procession, confraternity hood on, knife deep in the sheath, voice tuned to harmonious and faint. Guild supper, no bragging cloth, just a serviceable doublet that lets a man eat without looking like dinner. Historians still argue whether these choices really kept social peace or just moved envy into quieter, more polite rooms. From where you stand, envy hums either way. It simply prefers better lighting. At noon, the minstrel doffs his cap and reveals a matted crest of hair that has negotiated badly with hats. He points at your apprentice's blue hood. and improvises a couplet that rhymes true good with blue hood. It's not his best work, but you appreciate the effort. You toss him a halfpenny and he rewards you by changing the rhyme in the market song. Now the cloth kept time and kept measure. Your name rolled into a line that lands soft as bread. Clothes speak, songs speak, badges speak. Today, thankfully, they all tell the same story. On the way home, you pass a small procession of women from the weaver's lane, each wearing kerchiefs stitched with tiny hearts. One carries a basket for the parish churching feast, welcoming a mother back to public worship, and you remember how many garments are social passports, the white for brides, the black for loss, the candle white shift for the season of sorry. You adjust your hood and feel, almost physically, your reputation settling into the fabric around your shoulders, like a cat claiming the spot you warmed. You hang your tunic near the hearth and lay the jaunty cap in a chest with a respectful pat, like a familiar who needs a nap. Your apprentice polishes the lead stamp, as if it were a saint's toe. Before sleep, you set your badge by the window so the moon can admire St. Thomas's tiny confident face. One light joke whispers itself as you stretch your toes. At least the sumptuary rules have spared feet from goose-turd green. Some mercies are civic. Tomorrow you'll wear the same steady wool, the same moderate knife, and the same hood that says we are fine here. Clothes will do what words cannot. Invite the town to forget it. Ever knew a sharper version of your outline? Fashion, it turns out, is just confession, with better stitching. You notice it first in the way the miller smiles without using his eyes. He sets your usual sack on the scale, lifts the counterweight with the practiced tenderness of a man who negotiates with gravity for a living, and then, with more ceremony than necessary, taps the beam so the pans kiss and separate. Coin today, he says, almost kindly. Last week your tally stick lived on a hook by his door, your half in your pouch, his half in his ledger box, the two-notched twins that agree about what the future owes. Today his hook is bare. Hooks never look so clean as when they've just put you out. You show him your split, hazel shaved smooth, notches tidy as stitches, your mark and his mark facing each other like a bow ready to tie. He reaches, hesitates, and lets his hand fall. You know, he says softly, the song and the court and the fishmonger's mourning, all very tidy now. The wife sleeps better if your sack clinks. He shrugs the shrug of a man who has learned that peace at home outranks poetry in town. You understand. Your own hearth likes the sound of certainty too. You count out coins you meant to save for dye and watch grain become silence. Next, the wool stapler. He smells of lanolins in arithmetic. You've bought fleece from him on terms that once felt like friendship, a fortnight to pay after sale, the kind of trust that keeps winter warm. Today he fingers a lock of Leicester like a jeweler and talks about sureties. Who will stand for you if a week goes thin? Last month it was Master Ian from the next alley. His name in the margin of your bond worked like a second spine. But sureties are like cats. They go where they please. The stapler glances down the lane where Master Ian is busily not looking at you. Bring me a name, he says, or bring me coin. Mainstream truth takes your elbow. Much of late medieval buying and selling runs on credit. Not cash, tally sticks at the mill, book debts at the mercer's, IOUs, obligations sealed with wax in the guild chest. The Royal Exchequer itself loves tallies. If you split hazel just so fit and grain prove you didn't cheat the figures. Most tavern ceilings could tell you a parish's debts just by the pattern of sticks dangling over the bar. But the same system turns brittle when a rumour sandpapers it. One notch shaved off a town's patience, and the twins don't meet as neatly. You try the tanner next, a grim poet of vats and bark. He strokes his beard and recites the week's litany. There was that ale business, then the carter's song, then the pillory day. You point out politely, with the voice you save for priests and sharp knives, that you've done penance, won a love day settlement, measured like a clock with manners, and earned a warden's good order. The tanner nods as if agreeing with the weather. Friendly boycott, he mutters, just to calm the water. The phrase lands like a wooden spoon on an empty bowl, loud, hollow, vaguely edible. Not an edict, not even a rule, just neighbors deciding to blink slowly when you ask for favors. You spend the morning walking the same half-dozen stalls where your name used to do half the buying. Everywhere, hooks with space. Everywhere, men who look like they're choosing between prudence and kindness. You make a light joke, so light you could float it on milk, that you'd settle for credit smaller than your apprentice's appetite. But joking with empty hands is like clapping with gloves. Coins leave your purse with the quiet of good manners. A quirky tidbit tries to cheer you up at the chandler's. He keeps his customers' tallies, bundled by ribbon color, blue for millers, red for sailors, green for anyone whose debt includes beeswax for church candles. So the angels can see the ledger. He swears the green bundle goes lenient near Easter. Today he touches the green ribbon and then leaves it tied, palms up in apology. You buy a stub of wax anyway, because Sunday comes with or without credit, and you prefer your prayers visible. You think about finding a lender to paper the holes, someone who writes Latin formulas so stern they scare the coin into being on time. The scrivener at the corner bench spins chirographs like spiders spin silk, a deed written twice on one sheet, cut with a toothed line so the halves marry only to each other, witnesses' names curving like a blessing around the tear. He taps his inkwell and says what lenders always say: bring a surety, bring a pledge, bring interest that doesn't sound like a sin in church. You have a loom weight, a good knife, and a hood that signals harmlessness. None of those convert into comfort on paper. At the alehouse, the rosemary wreath looks like it wants to do a little advocacy. You lower your voice and ask the alewife whether anyone respectable is vouching this week. She wipes the board where she tallies mugs and eyes you as if measuring the truth of your thirst. People are skittish, she says. If you want a surety, try a confraternity. Candles buy patience. She points her ladle at your apprentice's borrowed blue hood, where the tassel still says someone in this town believes in you. You take the hint. Alms given publicly have a way of turning into credit privately. Wax softens hearts and ledger lines at the same speed. Back in the square, you try the old trick of trading work for time. You offer the porter a coin now for 2 lifts later. He scratches his neck and says, affectionately, that he already promised his back to your rival in exchange for a Sunday goose. Historians still argue whether medieval towns ran on coin or kindness, you think a little bitterly. But I know the answer: both, and my share of both just shrank. You sit on the church steps a moment to read the weather inside people's faces. The beadle crosses with a bundle of hazel twigs, reminder that love days work best when both sides bring biscuits and friends. A merchant's wife passes with a purse that chatters like cutlery. She nods but does not pause. Father Martin peers out, catches your eye, and makes the smallest gesture toward the north door's iron ring, the sanctuary symbol that buys time if not affection. You shake your head. You're not there yet. Sanctuary is for storms, not drizzle. Still, the ring has a gravity of its own once you've looked at it. Mainstream fact offers a dull comfort. Boycotts happen. Not the grand banners and barricades of later centuries, but a murmured "not today" that moves through stalls like a cool draft. Guild bylaws rarely write it down. Custom does the writing in the air. Some towns formalize it after a quarrel. A week without buying at so-and-so's, until he pays the poor box. But most times it's just neighbors lending caution to one another, the way they lend sieves quietly, with a promise to return it clean. Historians still argue whether such friendly refusals protected quality or simply squeezed rivals. The answer tastes like rosemary and compromise. By late afternoon, you have enough grain for 3 days, enough wool for 2 bolts, and enough coin left over to pay only the apprentice and the rent. The dye that would have made your cloth sing stays a wish. You improvise. You cut narrower widths for a humbler market. You piece leftovers into caps and sleeves, as if waste were a sermon against sin. You walk the long way to the mercer's, and ask whether he'll take small goods on consignment. You'll work on his table, you'll share later if it moves. He rubs his jaw, looks at his wife, and agrees to try one bundle if the stamp is crisp, and your ale gets a public kiss. You kiss it so ostentatiously, the saints could write a hymn about it. Quirky detail from the mercer's boy who is in love with arcana. Some folks swear by God be my broker tokens. Tiny pewter hands they hang near their scales for luck. He says his aunt used to rub hers before granting credit. She claimed St. Nicholas handled collections. You consider buying a pewter hand and decide your ceiling hook will do as a patron for now. A bare hook argues on your behalf better than a charm does. Evening draws its shoulder across the square, and with it comes a quiet calculation. You list the people who would still vouch, the alewife, perhaps the beadle, if only for a small pledge, the confraternity treasurer, if you promise 3 candles on Candlemas. You plan a tiny performance for tomorrow, 3 sails measured under the public ell, a loud donation of wax, and a half loaf for the poor box where everyone can see the crust. You will ask the miller to keep your tally twins in his drawer, even if he won't hang them yet. For the look of trust, you'll say, and he will. He loves the appearance of order almost as much as the fact. At home you set your tally half on the table and fit it against an imaginary mate. The edges meet with that strangely satisfying wooden zip that tells you the world can still be persuaded to align. You hold it there a breath longer than needed, as if the sound itself could pass for credit. Then you tuck it back in your pouch, count your coin twice, and put the nicest cap you own back in the chest. Tonight you will sleep with a plan under your pillow, livery for the apprentice again, a visit to the confraternity with a pledge for lamp oil, and a promise to the mercer that your stamp will bite deep and fair. If the boycott fades as boycotts do when boredom returns and new gossip arrives, you will remember this week the way people remember an ache. Not dramatic, but instructive. If it does not fade, you will consider the iron ring no one likes to talk about, and the road beyond it where feet make penance in miles. For the moment you stick to coins, candles, and the long patience of public measuring. The rosemary above the alehouse door waves like a small green flag. You salute it because even herbs sometimes vote. You stand under the north door again, palm on the cold iron ring you've been pretending is just decoration. It isn't. It's a handle on time, and today you need 24 hours of quiet that you can't afford to buy with coin. Father Martin sees your hand there and does not make a face. He simply lifts the latch, gestures you across the threshold, and says what priests say when they turn a building into a pause. Peace. You breathe. Outside, the square keeps its weather of glances and rumours. Inside, stone edits the volume down to prayer. Sanctuary isn't a magic shield exactly. It's a promise in architecture. A mainstream truth steps beside you like a verger with a lantern in many parts of medieval Europe. Famously in England, church sanctuary protected an accused person for a fixed period, often up to 40 days. And sanctuary isn't a magic shield. Exactly, it's a promise in architecture of 40 days. In that span, the coroner could come, take confession, and the claimant chose stand trial, or take the hard bargain called abjuring the realm. Your trouble is not felon's trouble. You haven't stolen a sheep or brawled a man into the Reeves notebook. But sanctuary also serves as a cooling dish for town tempers and creditors with loud voices. You are not hiding from law, you're hiding from momentum. Father Martin leads you to the frith stool stone seat, corners worn into empathy, and leaves you with a taper stub and a psalter. Wait here, he says, until the beadle's patience catches up to the street's enthusiasm. He adds, with the softness of a man who knows budgets, that the parish pantry will send bread. Quirky tidbit arrives with the sacristan's nod. This church, like Durham far to the north, once had a sanctuary knocker, a monstrous bronze head with a ring through its teeth. Ours lost its beastly glamour in a renovation, but the idea lingers. Some door rings are doorbells, and some are treaties. The beadle appears in the nave, with his pole held like a question mark turned into a cane. He looks at your boots, still on, thank God. The barefoot routine is for bigger theatre, and then he looks at Father Martin's face. He grunts what passes for consent. No writs here today, he says. If anyone wants to shout, let them light a candle instead. You picture the alewife's rosemary above her door, nodding in agreement. Herbs, priests, beadles. The habit of turning noise into ritual is a town's best hobby. You sit and let your breath line up with the nave's long perspective. You can almost feel the rumour knot loosening outside. Slower than you'd like, faster than you feared. Historians still argue whether sanctuary mostly shielded the desperate or enabled the slippery. You think, watching wax pool at your taper's foot. Maybe both. Maybe it's the same mercy, either way. A corridor you're allowed to walk while better choices gather themselves. Father Martin suggests a plan that is both penitent and opportunistic. Leave the church not for the market tomorrow, but for a short pilgrimage. Local, doable, narratively satisfying. Go to St. Friedeswide's shrine, he says. Offer a candle measured to your own arm and bring back a badge. People forgive on the way home from holy places. You almost smile. Pilgrimage as optics, the oldest public relations department in Christendom. A mainstream fact puts a scallop shell in your hat. Pilgrims wore pewter badges and ampulla, a Canterbury little flask filled with holy water, a Santiago shell, a local saint stamped in soft lead, as certificates you could pin to your hood, so strangers and creditors alike could read your humility without squinting. You sleep that night on a pallet by the rood screen, sanctuary bread politely stale by dawn. In the small hours you file one more slender worry, abjuration. You're not going to do it, but the word sits in the corner like a packed trunk. In England, if a felon chose abjuring the realm, he took a cross in his hand, swore before the coroner, went barefoot by the king's highway to a named port, kept to the road like it was a commandment, and shipped out on the first tide, under pain of outlawry if he lingered. Historians still argue whether abjuration cleansed the community or simply exported its trouble. Either way, it turned a person into distance. You are not that story. Yet, your version, the town-sized cousin, is to step away long enough that the beadle can forget your outline and the mercer can remember your stamp. Morning finds you with a Bourdon staff, borrowed from the sacristan's closet, carved rings, honest thumps on stone, and your hood pinned with last year's tiny lead saint, until you can buy the new badge to layer the message. The beadle escorts you to the porch, not as jailer, but as punctuation. This leaving is calm, not chaste. A child points and says, he's going on pilgrimage, and that sentence is more helpful than any affidavit. The road to the shrine smells of wet earth and hedges that can't decide between berries and thorns. Your apprentice walks halfway with you, then doubles back to mind a bench, his blue confraternity hood fluttering like a promise. You rehearse the line you'll say at the shrine. I ask for measure in my dealings and in my reputation. You also rehearse the light joke that will make the innkeeper like you. I'm paying with coin today. My tally stick is shy. Practice helps. A town is a stage and a witness box. A pilgrimage is a stage with better scenery. At midday you stop at a wayside cross, share bread with two women carrying jars, and get a news update that tastes like dill. The fishmonger has replaced his weights. The carter thinks your biscuit truce was good sport. The minstrel is trying out a new stanza that rhymes frithstool with be kind fool, which barely works but will do at a distance. Quirky pilgrim lore tags along. One woman swears that if you sew tiny bells to your cloak hem, saints can hear your approach and decide to prepare hospitality. You look at your already noisy life and try not to imagine being audible from heaven. By afternoon, the shrine's little town folds you in with the same choreography every shrine knows. A seller of candles who measures wax by cubit, symmetry. A man hawking badges whose tray glitters like a pewter galaxy, and an inn where the stew remembers yesterday with fondness. You buy a candle the length of your arm from elbow to fingertips. See Father Martin. We are keeping the joke gentle, and a badge of St. Fredis wide with a tiny staff pressed into her hand. Mainstream fact, slipped into your pocket with the badge. Some pilgrims poured holy water from their ampulla into town wells on their return, mixing sacred with municipal like good bakers mix old dough into new. You kneel, lay the candle, murmur the line about measure, and let your shoulders unclench one notch. On the way out, you trade a story with an old man who swears the saint once cured a baker's lying scales by turning them into geese. He knows it is both nonsense and beautiful. You buy him a cup, because miracles are currency too. Homeward road, quieter, badge catching light, feet confident, or the city gate you share pace with a tinker who nods to your badge and offers, free of charge, to straighten the rivet in your L's brass tip, so it clicks nicer when the beadle watches. Kindness arrives in odd hats. Back in the square, you do not walk to your stall. You walk first to the poor box with a small loaf, and to the church candles with a small pledge, because sanctuary doesn't end at the door, it echoes. Then you let the badge do some speaking for you. The miller meets your eye, and as if the scallop shell on your hood has a little gravity, says, "We'll put the tally back on the hook tomorrow." The stapler sniffs your wool and mutters that St. Fredis wide was always soft on fools, then sells you a small fleece at yesterday's price. The alewife holds up her rosemary wreath like a laurel and demands the story. You give her the short version and leave out the part where you almost couldn't breathe. You keep abjuration in the drawer with the scary knives. A concept, not a plan. If the town turned toothy again, you know the road you'd take. New town, new name, fair season, as your outline promised itself on a harder day. But tonight the beadle's pole looks bored. The minstrel tries a decent rhyme for once, and the rosemary over the alehouse door sighs as if the street finally smells of bread more than theatre. You sleep with the badge on your hood, and the hood on the chair where moonlight can read it. Sanctuary bought you hours, pilgrimage bought you optics. Tomorrow measure and patience will buy you habit. You think of the iron ring, the frith stool, the coroner's old choices, and decide that being cancelled is sometimes a town's way of asking for a better story. You are writing one, a candle length at a time. The road out of the gate rubs dust onto your boots and worries your thoughts smooth. You've promised the mercer 2 narrow bolts next week, which means you need flax yarn from the villages where hedges sag. Dogs introduce themselves by committee, and decisions grow under trees. The lane folds into hedge banks studded with stitchwort. A rook scolds you for bringing city pace where it doesn't fit. At the first green you find the moot. No benches, just a felled elm sawn flat, and a ring of faces that have already measured you more carefully than the public L ever did. The reeve gestures you in with a palm that says welcome and behave. Nobody writes anything yet. Danger. That's the first difference you feel in your shoulders. A widow complains that a neighbour's pig has learned to read fences as suggestions. The neighbour replies that acorns provoke trespass, and who can argue with acorns? A tithing man, one of the men who keeps 10 households hitched to one rope of responsibility, settles it with the speed of people who prefer chores to speeches. 3 mornings on the common with a switch for the pig, a new rail from the man whose tree dropped the acorns, a nod from everyone else, that this is sense. A mainstream truth sits comfortably on the stump. For all the talk of lords and charters, rural order leans hard on frank pledge, the old system of tithings where neighbours answer for one another at the biannual view, promising to bring forth wrongdoers, and to keep watch at night, when harvest isn't asking first dibs on every back. You explain your errand, flax yarn by martins spun tight enough to sing on the loom, and lay a sample strip on the elm. Fingers press, palms rub. A girl of 12 gives you a look that says your selvage could be tidier. She isn't wrong, and her grandmother translates with diplomacy. Payment, half now, half, when the last hank warms the mercer's shelf. Shorty, your badge glints, the reeve nods toward the church, where the parson's wife keeps a mental ledger of who has ever sent a loaf to a christening unasked. Reputation counts here, but it counts in casserole portions and cupfuls of malt. Historians still argue whether frank pledge truly bound villagers into mutual surveillance, or had, by your century, slumped into a formality, the clerk mumbled while everyone thought about hay. Today, at this stump, it feels like rope, scratchy, strong, useful when weather turns. Quirky tidbit: when the ale is tapped after the moot, the village ale taster ducks a finger, rubs thumb to forefinger, and announces with mock gravity that the brew strings fair. In London they boast about ale conners with leather breeches, who sit on wet benches to test for stickiness. Your taster only offers a grin and a proverb: if my finger keeps a friend, the brew keeps its price. You raise your cup. It tastes of nettles and patience, better in a field than it would in any hall. The reeve walks you to the strips behind the church, so you can see the flax laid to reet. The river does its patient work, loosening fibres while gossip does its quicker work, smoothing your outline. A boy leads a pig past you with a brand new respect for rails, and the widow gives you a nod that amounts to a receipt. No seal, no clerk, no Latin, only a shared sense that what was said now exists in the same air as the crows, and will be remembered the same way, loudly, then quietly, then as custom. You trudge back cityward with a pledge of yarn and an extra loaf someone pressed into your hands for the road, and for being the kind that stands under trees and listens. The gate swallows you. The town resumes its habit of writing things down the second they breathe. At the guildhall, a junior clerk is licking his quill to sharpen it, a habit that will dye his tongue black before 30, and copying pleas onto a roll that could gag an ox. If the village decided by nod, the city records by line and margin. A night watchman leans his billhook against the wall and recites his patrol in tidy phrases. First bell to cockcrow, lantern trimmed, strangers challenged. A mainstream fact plants itself like a pikestaff. The Statute of Winchester, 1285, laid out watch and ward, hue and cry for fleeing criminals. Weapons kept ready, town gates minded, night watch sworn. Whatever else fails, the clerk will have a word for it, and a place to put the word where tomorrow can find it. You wander the evening streets to taste the difference. The watch goes by in pairs. Lanthorn, Bill, a dog who has appointed himself third man, and pauses to chalk a brief mark on a doorpost where they settled a scuffle before it grew teeth. One calls out the hour with a tune that implies he liked his apprenticeship better than he likes midnight. Another jots a note on a wax tablet about a shutter left open after curfew. They are not unkind, just procedural. Historians still argue whether the watch actually deterred trouble or mainly produced paperwork that comforted aldermen, the aldermen for their part, adore being comforted in Latin. At the corner by the buttery, a constable reads a list pinned to the door, names of men who owe scot and lot, taxes and town duties, and the fines for those who skipped last leets and views. The handwriting looks like a spider learned manners. He adds, in a different hand, the day's petty entries: a broken weight seized, a cursed dog muzzled, a lamp replaced at the north gate. You imagine, involuntarily, The village version, no ink, but the same facts sitting on the stump with the same certainty, backed by the same neighbourly stare. Your joke for the evening very small, safe to smile at. If the village writes in bread and fences, the city writes in Latin and bills, and both, somehow, keep cats from marrying mice. You pay your visit to the mayor's court, because curiosity is also a candle. The sergeant unfolds a parchment like a sail, and calls causes in a voice trained to chase geese. A draper argues about a bolt measured 2 nails short. The clerk writes deceit with the same nib he uses for a size of bread. A baker is immersed for underweight loaves, pennies to the common fine entry made, lesson learned, or at least archived. A mainstream truth sits by the seal box. The record itself becomes a kind of punishment and a kind of shield. Your wrong written where your grandchildren can point to it. Your right written where your rival cannot edit. Quirky detail breaks the solemnity. The night watch keeps a lost and found chest. Inside it, the constable swears is a single shoe, green goose turd shade, abandoned after last month's pageant. No one will claim it. Half the town recognizes the swagger that walked in it. He holds it up like a relic. Laughter warms the hall. You think of the sumptuary cough the beadle gave those pointed shoes and feel your shoulders loosen another inch. When curfew bell gives its long persuasive sigh, shutters clap like hands calling a meeting to order. The watch lets its dog choose the route, which seems both democratic and efficient. He prefers butcheries where thieves hate the light. You walk the line of your street and feel, almost mathematically, how city peace stacks up. Writs and whacks and watchmen, bylaws and bylighters, the guild searches and the parish's penances. Out beyond the gate, peace prefers a stump, a reeve, and a switch for the pig. Here it prefers a docket, a seal, and a fine that feeds the lamp fund. Historians still argue whether either world, moot or hall, gave ordinary people more voice. Some say the village bound the loudest men to act like neighbours, while others say the manor's steward could turn nods into whatever served the rent. Some say the city's Latin democratized memory. Others say it privatized authority in closets with keys. You carry both arguments the way you carry the useful tools, if you keep them visible and don't wave them around like swords. Back at your door you hang the hood with St. Frida's Wide's badge where lamplight can find it. Set your apprentice's borrowed livery on a peg with a note to return it, and place the sample flax strip beside tomorrow's warp. The village promised yarn by Martins. The clerk promised a receipt for the fine you didn't get but might have. The watch promised to knock if your shutter forgets itself. You douse the candle and let your ears collect the town's bedtime noises. A final wheel on cobble, the watchman's tenor, a lame cat rehearsing a plea, the faint scrape of a quill finishing the day. You fall asleep betting on both systems to keep you steady. Neighbour eyes and clerk's ink, Reeves' finger, and mayor's seal. In the morning you'll measure publicly again. Old habits, new comfort. Send a loaf to the widow with the reformed pig, because fences deserve allies, and count down to Martinmas, when yarn becomes cloth, and cloth becomes coin, and coin becomes enough quiet to last until the next song thinks it can outrun your patience. The day takes on that stagey feel again, the square a low murmur, the butter cross a footlight, because the minstrel has decided your life rhymes. He tunes his gitten with little tugs that sound like a cat stretching, then leans on a phrase until the crowd leans with him. The cloth kept time with the bell at last. He sings, and the line lands with a soft thud of mercy. You place a halfpenny where he can see it, not to buy flattery, just to rent tempo. He tips his hat, then spices the verse with a wink at St. Frida's Wide, your pewter badge catching sun like a tiny lantern. And suddenly the song remembers your pilgrimage as promptly as it once remembered your mistake. Memory, you realize, has a rhythm before it has a verdict. A mainstream truth settles its cloak over the scene before broadsheets and cheap print made gossip. Stackable towns banked their news in mouths and music. Minstrels stitched market prices to saints' days, stitched aldermen to anecdotes, stitched sinners to lessons, and the stitches held because you could hum them while stirring soup. A guild ordinance might scold you once. A chorus could scold you weekly without anyone admitting they liked the tune. You stand halfway between pride and gratitude and let the refrain comb you into shape. After the market you drift, not by accident, toward the priory. Ink has a different voice than lute strings, and it too is in the memory business. The porter knows you by your ale now, and waves you through the warming room to the scriptorium, where winter makes monks into small patient furnaces. Quills chatter like quiet frost. Pumice hisses as a brother smooths a hairy page. A boy with purple-stained fingernails tempts fate beside a pot of woad. Brother Oswin, eyes like damp wool, humour like a coal under ash, lifts his head over a chronicle that looks like a long, obedient field. What brings the measuring man? He asks. A line in the book. You lift your hands, only if it rhymes with mercy. He smiles and taps the margin with his knife's blunt back. The text is for kings and plagues, he says. But the margins are where truth keeps its pets. He shows you last year's little sketch. A knight jousting a snail. You blink at the absurd bravery of it. The tiny helm, the smug snail, and Brother Oswin shrugs. The world is heavy, he murmurs. Margins are where it floats. Quirky tidbit, filed under things you wouldn't expect in a holy book, along with snails and rabbits riding hounds. Some scribes slip in their own weather reports. It is cold today. O Lord, fish with hats, and a bishop bald as a peeled onion. They are less jokes than reminders that the page is a place where humans live. You hover while he completes a chronicle entry about a frost that burned the apple blossom, and the new statue on the bridge that refuses to look like St. Christopher, no matter how much the donor squints. He pauses, glances at you, and writes a line spare as a bone, of a clothier who, accused of haste, took candle, sought measure, and made peace. No name, only shape, no accusation, only the path out. Ink is slow, he says, slow is patient. Historians still argue whether monastic chronicles serve the world as memory or morality, record or sermon, but standing here, breathing parchment and lamp smoke, you feel seen in a way songs rarely attempt. Down in the nave, another sort of writing is at work. Someone has scratched a ship into the soft stone near the north door. The kind boys carve when the sea is a rumour. Beside it are merchants' marks, little tridents, forks and crossed sticks that say, I was here, and so was my cargo. A mason with his hair full of dust tells you that if you open the old pewbacks, you'll find more ships, more initials, and a few prayers pinned to the wood with pig bristles. St. Nicholas, steer my tally true. He winks. Graffiti, he says, is just saints' letters written sideways. Back outside, the song has already sprouted variants. A girl adds hand claps between lines. A carter tries to compress the melody into a whistle so he can use it while loading. You notice something like civic gravity at work. The verse has stolen the edge off the early scandal and replaced it with a gently boring memory of a man who learned to love the L. This is how satire helps a town. It makes a point, then makes that point familiar, and then, if you are lucky, makes it dull. Toward evening you follow the scent of vellum and lamp oil to the town scrivener's bench. He sells tidy words for untidy moments. He has taken your love day settlement and made it respectable with a clause that sounds like a hymn. Wherefore the parties, in charity and town peace, renounce additions and enlargements of the tale. He reads it aloud with pleasure. Additions and enlargements he repeats, as if fattening were a sin peculiar to stories. You tuck the deed away and feel it weigh less than your worry, more than a rumour, the perfect size for a pocket. The scrivener keeps another book under his elbow. Curse formula he copies for people who fear their volumes will wander. He shows you a favourite, Who steals this book shall be boiled in the first cauldron in hell. The line is written in a hand so cheerful it reads like a cake recipe. You imagine someone scratching a quieter curse into a market bench. Who repeats this story with extra inches shall find his ale watered forever. Perhaps the ale conners would approve. Mainstream fact, low and sturdy as a stool. In many towns, ale tasters, ale conners, quite literally tested brew quality, and some, to folklore at least, wore leather breeches and sat on a froth-slick bench to check stickiness. You've never seen the breeches, but you've seen the pride. By lamplight you and your apprentice sort the week's scraps, narrow bias strips that might become laces, a selvage worth a cap, a square that could be a purse, and you talk about the way jokes travel faster than facts. He confesses he's been tempted to add a flourish to his measurements. When the crowd presses, the kind of swoop that wins a gasp, you wag your finger. Swoops rhyme with trouble. He nods like a boy who has recently heard a pillory hour hum through his bones. You return to the priory at Compline, because soft psalms are a good solvent for sticky days. Brother Oswin catches your sleeve as the community files out and slips you a scrap, no larger than a fig leaf, on which he has doodled a tiny L with a halo over it. Underneath, in a hand that leans like a friend, he has written, "Measure and be measured." It's not scripture, but it sits well beside it. You tuck it into your ledger and feel the page become a little warmer. Market day settles into a warmer hum, and you drift toward the green bush doorway where the alewife rules like a small benevolent storm. Her ladle is a scepter, her ledger is older gossip written in numbers. Her rosemary wreath still watches like a nosy aunt. You've come for a mug and for the temperature of the street. The beadle is already inside, cap set straight, testing measures with a look that could curdle milk and a pewter cup stamped with the town's seal. He tips, peers, nods, tips again, because in this place, truth is supposed to be exactly 1 pint wide. A mainstream truth takes a stool beside you. The assize of bread and ale in one form or another told towns for centuries how heavy a loaf must be at a given grain price, and how strong and fairly measured ale should be. Ale tasters or ale conners wandered from door to door with official cups and official faces. Fines fed lamps and poor boxes, and public peace kept its thirst in check. Today's taster, our beadle moonlighting, tries the ale, rubs his thumb and forefinger together the way old hands do, and pronounces it, sticking to the right memories. The room relaxes. It doesn't stay easy for long. Two men who prefer their news loud complain that the alewife's pots are short by a thumb, which is a very poetic way to accuse a woman of stealing. She draws herself up to her full command and slaps a measure on the table, the rim shining with that polished, innocent look metal gets when it's about to be vindicated. You can feel the air taking sides. The rosemary's on hers. The beadle reaches for his yard of small pegs, the town's gauge to check if cups have grown inward, and works down the holes with the ritual boredom of a priest who has done this mass too often. You remember your own dance with measures, and you step closer to be useful without becoming the show. Let's bring the peg tankard, you suggest. The one with holes bored honest by the guild. Quirky tidbit gets its time at the table. Some towns used peg tankards, cups with a vertical ladder of pegs, so drinkers couldn't claim more than their share, and so inspectors could prove volume without arguing with foam. People say the phrase, "Take you down a peg," sails out of these cups. The alewife snorts that the phrase was probably born in a brawl, not a brewery. The pegs tell a quiet truth. Her pots are full measure. The complainers redden. The beadle inclines his head, and the rosemary wreath positively preens. But the room's weather doesn't clear. It pivots. One of the men mutters that the alewife uses her tongue like a flail when credit's tight. A few nods ripple. Someone whispers the word scold. You've heard that word before, usually from men who confuse a woman's spine with storm season. A mainstream fact knocks politely and sits scolding cases. Loud, quarrelsome, disruptive speech, often pinned to women, turn up in manorial and borough records, especially where small communities want quiet more than they want fairness. Punishments could be fines, public confession, the stocks, or the threat everyone says, but hopes won't be used, the ducking or cucking stool. Historians still argue whether Brewster culture in earlier centuries, women brewing for sale, made targets of the very women who kept neighbours watered, or whether later, more commercial brewing simply shoved women aside and punished the ones who stayed loud. Either way, female voices took on legal shadows faster than men's did. The alewife's daughter tries to calm the wake with bread and cheese, and if bread could vote, you'd already be done. But the mutterers want a theatre. They mention the stool in the yard by the stream, the one with a hinge and a seat that turns cold water into a sermon. Your stomach does that quiet flip again. You've seen it rolled out twice in memory, once for a woman who sold mugs that tasted like river and excuses, and once for a man who called a neighbour's mother a goat in language saltier than cod. The stool has longer stories for women, but its lumber remembers both kinds of folly. Before the mood tilts further, you do what a town has taught you to do. You move the moment onto rails. Let's call a love day, you say. Not about ale, which the pegs have settled, but about tongues. You produce biscuits. Your peacemaking ones never taste good, which helps invite 2 oath helpers for each side, and walk the argument out under the eye of daylight and simple sentences. The beadle, grateful for verbs, brings his pole like punctuation. Out by the stream a small crowd collects. You make everyone say what they actually mean, not what they want to perform. The men want the alewife to stop calling their tab the king's debts when they're late. She wants them to stop treating her doorway like a chorus stage when they're 2 mugs in. The alewife proposes chalk marks on a backboard, credit drawn in lines where everyone can see, and a sign that says no songs after the 3rd mug. She offers because she is wise and has a daughter to host a churching feast next week for a new mother, the sort of public kindness that rebraids frayed thread. The men agree to sweep her floor on market mornings for a month and to let the beadle taste their tongues before their complaints next time. Everyone laughs at that one, but it sticks. Yes, the stool stands there, a wooden suggestion with iron opinions. You refuse to let it do the talking. The beadle scratches a short note in wax, piece by bread and board, measures found full, and breaks a twig over the stream. You ask the rosemary wreath overhead to bless this arrangement. It appears to approve. Historians still argue whether ducking stools are really medieval fixtures or more at home in the early modern taste for tidy cruelty. The records scatter. Some 13th century mentions blur into later practices. Some 17th century towns boast about their favourite hinge, as if it were a clever mill. You prefer not to give oak new stories to tell. Back inside, the alewife hangs a small pewter badge on the pegboard, a tiny hand, palm outward, the God be my broker charm you heard about at the mercer's. For credit, she says with a grin, also for silence. She pours you a small ale on the house and mutters that if the town wants women quiet, it should stop making them handle all the noisy jobs. You raise your cup because she's right, and because the rosemary smells especially opinionated today. Quirky neighbourhood law sneaks in wearing an apron. One corner of the room has a lidded bucket, half full of cold water and smooth pebbles. The alewife tells you she makes known shouters put their hands in it, both of them, and count to 50, while the room counts with them. She swears it resets people. You doubt theology supports this, but empirically it seems to work. By afternoon, the scold talk has dissolved into a safer chatter. The pilgrim badge on your hood, the minstrel's new verse that rhymes peg with beg your pardon, the beadle's grandchild who will not nap. You measure openly, because that's your new prayer, and you buy 2 mugs for a pair of women who have been minding everyone's temper like it's their own. A mainstream truth pads by on quiet feet. Women's work, brewing, baking, nursing, midwifery, keeping credit tallies that husbands pretend not to understand, stabilizes towns. Women's noise often looks like warning bells men haven't learned to hear. Historians still argue whether scold prosecutions express patriarchy or public health. The answer in this room tastes like rosemary and arithmetic. Toward evening, the alewife pins a little notice near the pegs. Measure first, speak second, sing third, duck never. You grin. It's the best bylaw you've read all season. She presses a crust into your hand and tells you to deliver it to the widow with the fence-mended pig, because fences and tempers don't maintain themselves. You go. Of course you go. The air outside carries a hush that means stews are thickening and children have discovered sleep. The stream gurgles like a small, forgiving throat clearing. Your one joke for the night, gentle as a feather, arrives when the minstrel tries to rhyme rosemary with no scary. You promise him an extra halfpenny if he never sings that again. He laughs, which is as good as a contract. Back home you hang your hood, badge bright, edges tired in the good way, and set the peg tankard you borrowed back by the door to return at first bell. The ducking stool remains asleep by the stream, its hinge unworried, its plank unvisited. May it stay that way. Tomorrow you will measure with your L again and again, because repetition is the lullaby the town likes best. And if another scold case blows in on the afternoon breeze, you will reach for biscuits, pegs, and chalk before you reach for oak and water. Not because drama can't be satisfying, but because sleep is better when the night is boring and the rosemary only has to smell nice. You decide to purchase a little piece, the old-fashioned way, with light bread and attendance. Patronage here isn't trumpets and marble horses, it's lamp oil for the nave, loaves on a bench where cold hands can reach, and your face in the right room when the right psalm is sung. So you start your morning at the parish chest, where 3 keys must agree before anything important happens. The church wardens arrive in sequence like notes in a chord, one with the big key, one with the little, one with the key that always sticks. And out comes the book that smells of smoke and rain. A pound of wax, you say, and you set it down, wrapped in cloth stamped with your mark. The wardens nod. The sacristan weighs it on the parish balance, and the beam kisses even. You can't resist. Measured by the L of mercy, the beadle snorts. It counts as your joke for the day. A mainstream truth takes your elbow in most medieval towns. Parish charity and guild benevolence knit the civic fabric, wax for lights, oil for lamps, bread and ale for the poor. On feast days, dowry funds for maiden portions, fraternity chests for sick members, funeral candles for the brother who won't need candles again. Confraternities, pious clubs with bylaws and feasts, tend the lamps, pay stipends for anniversary masses, carry each other to burial, and wear livery hoods, so everyone can see who belongs when the procession loops the square. Your apprentice still has that borrowed blue hood. Today you mean to secure one of your own that doesn't smell like 10 other heads. At midday you climb the stairs to the guildhall's upper room, where the confraternity of Our Lady keeps its chest, its banner, and its habit of asking gently before it asks firmly. The door creaks on a hinge that thinks about theology. Inside, 3 elders sit behind a table with the club's accounts, candles in, alms out, meat purchased for the annual feast, and a tidy column for pittances to pour at obits. You bow, mention your Sunday taper, your shrine badge which twinkles helpfully, and your desire to stand in company, which is the polite way of saying you'd like your reputation to lie under a warm blanket. Their questions are practical and polite. Will you pay the entry due in coin or wax? Can you carry a torch at rogation when the fields need blessing? Will you attend the vigils for deceased brethren, the ones with long psalms and longer benches? Yes, yes, and yes. You also offer something with your hands attached, Cloth for a new processional streamers. Nothing showy, just solid blue with a neat selvage that doesn't curl in wind. The elders exchange the look of men who prefer offers that arrive with thread already cut. Accepted, says the senior, writing your name in a hand that makes you 3 inches taller. The livery hood arrives from a chest that keeps secrets and moths at bay. Blue, like your apprentice borrowed one, but with a little badge of Our Lady sewn near the shoulder, pewter and soft the finger. You lift it, smell tidy wool and a hint of frankincense from last winter's procession, and try it on. Hoods are social grammar. This one conjugates you in the plural. A quirky tidbit from the warden's mouth as he straightens your hem on certain feasts. The confraternity elects a boy bishop, a child vested in tiny mitre and cope, who processes with candles and distributes small pittances. A theatrical kindness that trains the town to smile. The practice happens more north than here, he admits, but everyone loves an excuse for almonds and processionals that end near ovens. Afternoon finds you at the hospital gate, the charitable house, not the surgeon's. It's a small complex of beds and bread, a hall for the poor and sick, a chapel for prayers, a kitchen that knows exactly how to make onion soft enough to be mercy. You speak with the master, who wears responsibility like an apron, and ask which gifts hush the most trouble. Fuel, lamp oil, bread, he says. Names on our bead roll, he adds, showing the long strip where benefactors and their dead are listed for prayer. You put a small loaf on the board and a small coin in his hand, and ask, because the town is teaching you to be honest, even about your wanting, that he add your mother's name to the roll. He asks the spelling like a scribe, taking down a saint. When the choir reads that roll at even song, the sound will be longer by 1 syllable, and you will breathe in time with it. The mercer meets you in the square, with a face that wants to be friendly, and a ledger that wants to be accurate. You mention the confraternity hood and the hospital gift without puffing. He mentions that the Corpus Christi play will need fabric for the angels, a serviceable white without jealousy. You offer a bolt at cost, stamped like a confession. He grins over his shoulder at his wife. Deals that make sense to women tend to survive. We'll stand for your next purchase, he says, meaning surety, meaning your credit line has discovered a railing again. Historians still argue whether confraternities mainly sanctified business networks or genuinely sheltered the poor apart from profit. Your week so far suggests both are true at once. The bread is real, and so are the friendlier terms. Near Vespers, the parish wardens rehearse for the upcoming procession. They unfurl the banner with its painted Virgin and Child, faces scrubbed gently by 100 breezes, and practice the turn at the butter cross, so the poles don't smack the saint. You and your apprentice take your new places in line. The beadle nods. The rosemary wreath in the alehouse doorway pretends not to watch, and the minstrel, face unexpectedly solemn, keeps his lute quiet during the hymn. When the singers reach the verse about remembering our benefactors, you feel your name slip into the current, like a pebble dropped into a clear stream. You linger in the chancel afterward, and ask Father Martin about abits, the yearly remembrance days funded by small endowments. He shows you the abit book, edges blackened with honest handling, dates, names, the number of candles promised, the psalms to be said, and the doles of bread each poor person should receive at the door. We ring the bell slow, he says, and we do not forget, he adds, because he knows the shape of your conscience, that an obit isn't vanity. It's a rope thrown backward, so the living can pull themselves toward gentleness once a year, by the memory of someone's generosity. He smiles. If you cannot endow, at least attend. Standing sometimes feels like paying. You stop at the scrivener's on your way home, because even generosity likes a receipt. He drafts a line stating that your pound of wax, your bolt for the banner, and your small gift to the hospital are to the comfort of town and the worship of God. A phrase that makes your purse feel lighter and your chest heavier in a good way. He sprinkles sand to dry the ink, and while it sips, he shows you a set of pax boards, painted little plaques. The parish passes at Mass for the kiss of peace. Some say it keeps the peace safer than kissing everyone's beard, he says, eyes laughing. You tap one with a finger. The paint is smooth from a century of shy lips. By lamplight, you lay out the white cloth for the angels and mark the cut lines with chalk, measuring slower than compline. Your apprentice hums the minstrel's mercy version under his breath, kept time, kept measure, and you let it be your stitching rhythm. On the table sits a folded paper from the confraternity, the next vigil's time, the list of brethren to visit if they fall sick, a reminder to carry a torch with a steady arm, and to look like you mean it. You do. To meaning it has become the only cleverness that works. Before bed you walk one more loaf to the hospital gate. A sister takes it with hands that smell of rosemary and soap. Apparently the herb has opinions everywhere, and tucks it among the evening bowls. In the dark beyond the door, someone coughs, someone laughs softly, someone says a prayer in a voice that makes you think of fathers who never learned letters, and mothers who learned how to count with their palms. You stand a moment where you're not in the way, and let the ordinary holiness wash your ears. Back at your hearth, you hang the blue hood beside your work cap and watch them get acquainted. Patronage and craft, charity and trade, candle and ale. Historians still argue whether such gifts buy absolution or merely rent applause. You shrug into sleep, knowing that light is light, bread is bread, and the town is more merciful when procession lines have fewer gaps. Tomorrow you'll hem the angel tunics, oil the banner poles, and carry a torch that drips on your knuckles just enough to remind you that warmth never arrives without a little sting. You can live with that, the rosemary would approve. You take the blue hood down from its peg, kiss St. Friedeswide's pewter face for luck, and tell your apprentice you're going to see if your name can breathe in a new wind. Not to run. Running is a story for thieves and romances, but to test that other path your heart has been fingering. Fairs where the town loosens its belt and strangers speak money in the same accent. You pack 2 narrow bolts, a purse with enough coin to look respectable and not enough to invite poetry, a letter from the confraternity vouching that you carry your own candlelight and your L polished to the point of vanity. The gatekeeper marks your bundle with a chalk squiggle that means toll paid for now, and the road unrolls with hedges practicing their summer impressions. By the second mile you're in the company of others who believe a tent, a charter, and a bell can change a month. A tinware man whose cart sings when he hits ruts, a dyer's niece with fingers the colour of myth, 2 students aiming for a bookseller, and a woman with a basket of onions sturdy enough to survive a siege. You pass a painted board that promises the peace of the fair, a truce of kinds, a little republic of stolage, and customs set up in a meadow, with more rules than a monastery, and more excuses than a tavern. A mainstream truth throws its mantle around the procession. Great fairs, Champagne's circuit in an older century, St. Bartholomew in London, Stourbridge outside Cambridge, Boston's Martinmas in Lincolnshire, ran on charters, tolls and temporary courts. The piepowder court from piepowder, dusty feet, tried disputes fast enough that the dust didn't have time to settle. Weights, measures, debts, slanders, broken bargains, all translated into a clerk's Latin before supper, if everyone talked at a reasonable pace. The meadow comes into view with the particular feral glory of commerce, pitched on grass, holes braced against sky, a street of canvases staked as neatly as pews, a banner that claims safe conduct under the mayor's seal, and a man who has somehow turned a cart into a stage. You pay stolage, a fee for the right to breathe in the rectangle you call yours, and murrage for the town's walls, even though the walls are mostly theory out here. Another officer asks for pavage for roads, and you hand him the small coin towns use to remind you who paved your boots. They mark your canvas with a splash of chalk that looks like a dismissive bird. It counts as your visa. You court customers with courtesy in the theatre of public measure. You lay the L where everyone can see, and lay your voice low where everyone can like it. A woman from 3 parishes away eyes your selvage, presses it the way one tests fruit, and says she'd buy if you had a newer name. You smile with the careful mischief of someone considering it. In the fair's grammar, names bend easily. John at the sign becomes John in the meadow for a week. Alice the brewer becomes Alice the cake. If the auditors sniff too hard at barley, you do not lie, you emphasize. Your badge does some polite chorusing. Your blue hood sings harmony. From the cross-street bench you say, measured clean at hall. It isn't a new name, but it's a better chorus. The town hangs its guarantee over the traffic. Flags stitched with the mayor's seal snap in a breeze that smells of meat pies and ungoverned ambition. Quirky tidbit arrives with a boy who boasts that the court of piepowder is so quick. The judge keeps sand under the table to time cases. When the scribe's toe can't write your grievance before the dust settles, you're telling it wrong. You grin, and the beadle on loan to the fair grins back, because even jokes wear a uniform here. He shows you the official weights, fat iron pairs again, with nicknames and dents that are half history, half therapy, and a notch stick for measuring booth frontage, so nobody grows sideways without paying for the privilege. You make your first sales by noon to a glover who likes narrow cloth for lining, and to a cap maker who buys offcuts like poems. A student hesitates over a battered prayer psalter, and then, because youth believes in owning its own bedtime, purchases a small square for pillow ticking instead. You stamp. You measure loudly enough to comfort passing saints. You do that tiny shoulder gesture that says, I keep accounts the way I keep my shoes dry. The minstrel, of course he is here. Fairs are where songs change clothes. Tries a verse about dusty feet and honest ells. You feed him a rhyme for stolage, and he gives you one for courage that you decide to keep for later. Mid-afternoon brings the thing fairs always bring when money congregates. Complaint. A tinware man claims a Fleming sold him bad pots. The Fleming claims the tinsmith's thumb weighs more than his conscience. They go to the piepowder bench, a trestle under a strip of sky where a clerk, a sergeant, and a justice, with a face like a closed ledger, listen faster than sermons. Witnesses swear on a book that smells of recent hands. The court borrows the beadle's balance and a hammer, taps rims, measures gauge, asks the clerk to write sound or false in the same ink he uses for God. The judgment is quick, the fine sized to sting but not maim, and everyone gets a chalk mark that means the matter has stopped moving. Historians still argue whether fairs made justice more accessible or simply more convenient for those with big stalls. Standing here, you feel how speed itself is a kind of mercy. You eat standing, because chairs in this wind tend to remember that they are cousins to sails. The onion woman teaches you a trick you'll never forget. Rub your fingers with fresh parsley, and the onions shout quiets. Your eyes go back to minding their own business. She also swears Stourbridge sells printed images so cheap, even poor men can hang saints over their bed. She pronounces the woodcut saints by committee, and very handsome. You buy a scrap of parsley, and decide that cures which work on tears also work on tempers. Put that in your market book. Evening leans over the meadow. A goose procession hurries by. The birds with blue-dyed heads so their owners can count them. A sight that would look absurd anywhere but here. The dye leaves your fingers a cheerful bruise when you help a child catch a fugitive honker. You sell the last of your narrow bolt at a price that feels like reconciliation with your ledger. The dyer's niece, pale hands, blue half-moons, buys a strip and says this edge won't curl with the seriousness of someone who appreciates small obediences. You tuck that sentence into the pocket where you keep your better nights. You consider, quietly, whether a new town would welcome you if the old one grew fussy again. Fairs are recruitment drives for futures. You could aim for a charted borough 2 days on, where your apprentice could vanish into a different set of bylaws, and your blue hood would mean kind in a dialect no one suspects yet. A clerk sells letters of recommendation, the way the baker sells loaves, simple, sustaining, risky if stale. You buy ink instead, and write a line to yourself. You have a name. It has learned to stand. Before curfew's horn shaves the light, you walk the fair's outer ring and study the mechanics of newness. Brokers exchange bows like liturgy. Hostellers memorize accents and promises. A friar preaches about money and mercy, as if the words were cousins, and a few men weep with the relief of hearing their coin called innocent by someone in a habit. You stop at the shrine booth. Every fair grows a portable holiness, and pin a tin star near your saint. The woman selling charms offers a pewter hand for luck in bargains. You tell her you already carry 2 serviceable ones. You sleep under your canvas on a bed of woven reeds. The fair sells to people who believe in backs. Dreams come flavored with onion and ink. In the morning you settle tolls, fold the canvas, and watch the meadow retract its streets until commerce is again a rumour kept by grass. Mainstream truth, one more for the road. Fairs do 2 things at once: move goods, move reputations. Men rise on a good week's credit like bread, and fall on a bad week's verse like dough that forgot to wake. Historians still argue whether fairs offered real mobility to small traders, or mostly widened the roads for men who already owned carts. Your answer arrives in the weight of your purse, heavier by pennies, lighter by dread. Back at the city gate, the keeper chalks your bundle with a squiggle that means welcome back, and the rosemary above the alehouse door looks pleased to have your shadow again. You hang the blue hood with more affection than when you left, and tell your apprentice that next year he'll see the fair with his own feet. Bring parsley, you say, for tears and onions. He laughs, and the laugh sounds like someone who plans to stay. You wake with the kind of clear-headedness that arrives when a list has finally chosen you. The blue hood waits on its peg. Your L lies where morning can admire it, and the badge of Saint Frid is wide, taps your shoulder like a polite aunt. Time to make your name comfortable for the long sleep. You start with accounts, because nothing rests if numbers twitch. The miller greets you with the hook newly burdened by your tally twin. He notches a final V to square the last sack and smiles with his eyes this time. The stapler sniffs at your fleece, weighs it like judgment, and says the word you needed: settled. You don't feel lighter, exactly. You feel placed like a stool set where it won't wobble. The scrivener spreads his quills like a fan and opens a clean sheet as if it were a small meadow, your testament, soul and chattels. He asks who should have the loom weights. The apprentice, of course, who gets the knife with the modest handle, a cousin who cuts quietly, and whether any alms should arrive in your name on the day bells say your name in the slow way. You choose loaves for the hospital, lamp oil for the nave, and a pound of wax to be burned where drafts like to argue. A mainstream truth rests its palm on the page. Medieval wills and testaments, often mixed shop lists with soul care, tools divided, debts forgiven, soul scot or mortuary due acknowledged, and money set aside for doles of bread on the funeral day. Many towns keep bedrolls of benefactors. The living read the names aloud, so memory keeps its chores. The scrivener suggests a small bequest to your guild's poor box for any brother fallen upon hard ale.
You added, and because you've learned how cloth and ritual interleave,
you also bequeath 2 serviceable tunics to be made into funeral gowns for those who arrive shivering to bury a friend. He writes the lines with a contented hum and sprinkles sand. Quirky tidbit surfaces as he reaches for the seal. He keeps a little box labelled mouse-gnawn bell ropes, a fund parish clerks invented after rodents taught them theology. Your coins buy a new rope and perhaps a truce with mice. You ask him to word one clause carefully. your rival's debt to you, small and old, forgiven in full for peace. He raises an eyebrow, but writes it. Then you walk to the man himself and hand him a copy. He reads, flushes, and huffs the sigh of a man who has rehearsed a denial and cannot perform it. We were both idiots, he says, which is truer than most measurements. In the square the beadle pretends not to see the handshake. He looks at his poll and decides it is very interesting today. At the church porch, Father Martin pulls from a cupboard the Ars Moriendi booklet, a set of short counsels for a good death, and touches the margins the way one touches a patient pulse. Don't make a scene. The book basically says, in drawings kinder than the instruction sounds. Confess, reconcile, ask a blessing, keep your bed orderly, let your neighbours eat. Historians still argue whether late medieval obsession with a good death was deep piety or social choreography, conscience or crowd control. But you find the instructions curiously soothing, like a well-folded sheet. He asks if you want a Trental 30 masses to be sung after you've gone. You choose a simpler thing, a year's obit, a bell slow enough the town can stir its compassion without spilling its stew. Back in your shop, you set aside a chest for the apprentice, EL, touchmark stamp, the doodled measure and be measured. Brother Oswin slipped you, and the lavender half-shell you kept as a joke against panic. You write one line for him in your own hand, crooked, honest, count out loud when the crowd is loud. He pretends not to read it twice. You also tie a small purse to the handle of your peg tankard, for the alewife's board, you write, because she has measured tongues when laws were busy elsewhere. You tuck in a sprig of rosemary, it will understand the errand. The minstrel finds you before noon because of course songs show up when paper does. He asks, in the voice he saves for whether you'd like your refrain softened for the record. Kept time, kept measure, he offers, and kept neighbours. You pay him with a coin that rings like a tiny bell, and a condition. No cleverness about pairs and weights at my graveside. He laughs. Promise made. He also confesses that he once slept on a church bench after drinking philosophy. You absolve him, priest you are not, and tell him to aim his chorus at the buttercross, where memory goes to shop. The guild warden receives your bequest with a face that means yes, and we will read your name at supper. He adds gravely that if you die owing, charity may cover what skill began. If you die lending, charity will learn to forgive as debtors do. Historians still argue whether guild charity flowed because of brotherhood or because the town feared hungry craftsmen more than bad weather. The ledgers show both, loaves out, fines in, dinners purchased that feed belonging like a clever sauce. A last errand. The manor steward for the question of Heriot, the best beast a lord may claim at a tenant's death. You keep no ox. Your best chattel is a knife and a reputation that now behaves. The steward, bored into politeness by better people than either of you, declares that a small mortuary due to the church will content God and Lord. He writes, no beast with the pleasure of a man who has dodged a conversation about cows. You leave with the queer relief of someone whose death has been budgeted and found affordable. Evening invents the kind of peace that smells faintly of starch and bread. You stop by the hospital with a basket of small rolls stamped with a cross, and an old woman, exactly the sort who knows where all the town's ropes fray, grips your sleeve and says, "We will say your name." You nod, embarrassed and more cured by that sentence than by any medicine. In the nave, Brother Oswin has illuminated a tiny L in the margin of today's entry. It leans like a smile. You kiss your fingers to it, which is not a liturgical act, but feels like one. At home you stack receipts, the confraternity's acknowledgement, the hospital's thanks, the warden's note about the banner cloth, and slide your will into the little chest where the badge sleeps. One more small human thing. You line up your shoes by the door, laces tucked, as if telling the room, if I need them again, I won't trip. Your light joke soft for you alone. arrives as you blow out the candle. You've left so many bequests that if you outlive them, you may have to borrow your own tunic back. You promise to be sensible. You lie down with the feeling that a town can forgive if given rituals to keep its hands busy. Bread to break, names to read, ropes to replace, wax to burn. The rosemary at the alehouse door breathes its evergreen grammar. The beadle's pole stands useless and content. The minstrel polishes a rhyme without teeth. If being cancelled is a town's way of holding a mirror too close, then soft peace is simply a patient arm, setting the glass at the right distance so the face looks like a person again. You are that person. You sleep. And now let the square grow quiet, the benches empty of elbows, the butter cross cool to the touch. You have said what needs saying, left the right coins where they do the most gentle work, and tidied the little tools that once felt heavier than iron. In the alehouse doorway the rosemary settles, a small lantern of scent that keeps memory kind. The beadle leans his pole against the wall and chooses not to think of rules for a while. In the nave the last candle finds its own pace, a slow breathing flame that asks nothing from you except to let it burn. Let the shops float backward, shutters soft against their hooks, and the street become only a ribbon of lamplight that sighs as night tests the paving. Your hood rests neatly on its peg. Your L lies quiet, no longer a banner, just a familiar length of wood that has learned to belong to your hand without asking. Somewhere a minstrel tries his strings in a different key and gives up smiling. Somewhere a clerk closes his inkhorn and places a square of wool over it like a blanket. The quarrels have found smaller rooms, and the town has chosen boredom, the kind that lets sleep be what it is supposed to be, unremarkable. Breathe slow and long. Imagine a list you've carried folding itself down to a single line, then to a dot, then to nothing at all. If thoughts fly in, let them perch and go. If they come back, let them sit farther away. Hear the watch call the hour, as if it were naming a friend. Hear the dog decide it has no suggestions tonight. All the little debates about measures and songs, about pegs and penances, can be put on the cool shelf until morning. For now there is only the easy weight of a blanket, the soft drift of a room that knows you, and the lightest promise that you have become, finally, the sort of story that quiet enjoys telling itself.